The sticky, cloying scent of overripe pumpkin pulp, fermented and sweet, mingled with something sharper, something metallic and undeniably visceral. It was a smell I knew far too well, a vile perfume that had followed me across countless state lines, a harbinger of the grotesque. The woman, or what was left of her, hung from the porch swing, a macabre scarecrow dressed in cheap, tattered black fabric, a ridiculously oversized witch's hat askew on her head. Her face, a mask of terror stretched taut and frozen in death, was already starting to bloat. A faint purplish discoloration creeping up her neck. A thick, viscous liquid, not pumpkin guts, but something dark and syrupy, seeped from the crude stick that wasn't a broomstick at all. It was a jagged, crudely sharpened pole driven clean through her chest, pinning her to the rotting wood. Dellen, the picture-perfect town that supposedly forgot Halloween, had just thrown the most elaborate, most horrifying party I'd ever had the distinct misfortune to witness, and I was, as usual, the unwilling guest of honor, the only one present who understood that this wasn't some local tragedy. This was just another Tuesday. It had all started so innocently, with the pumpkins, a slow, insidious creep of vibrant orange into a town that prided itself on its quiet, almost aggressively normal existence. I'd rolled into Dellen a month ago, the rust-flecked paint of my old pickup truck still grumbling from the last cross-country haul. I was looking for nothing more than a few weeks of blessed anonymity, a brief port in the perpetual storm of my life, and a paycheck from the night shift at the old cannery on the edge of town. Dellen had seemed ideal, tucked away. No real draw for tourists, just a sleepy little dot on the map where I could lay low, pretend to be just another tired man clocking in and out. I hadn't expected the storm to brew right here, under the guise of an autumn harvest. Dellen was a place that almost hurt to look at with its pristine lawns, its neatly trimmed hedges, and houses that looked like they'd been plucked from a postcard. Cozy, the locals called it. I called it suspiciously quiet. My old analog wristwatch, a nervous habit, felt heavier on my wrist than usual in this almost oppressive stillness. My worn leather jacket felt too conspicuous. The town, I'd learned quickly, had a peculiarity. They didn't acknowledge Halloween. Not a single plastic spiderweb, not a grinning jack-o'-lantern, not even a whisper of the word. They just skipped October 31st. They loved autumn, though. They'd wax poetic about the crisp air, the kaleidoscope of leaves, the smell of wood smoke curling from chimneys, all the comfortable, non-threatening parts of the season. It reeked of suppression, like a collective, tightly wound spring. That sort of forced normalcy always put me on edge. Experience had taught me that the things people tried hardest to ignore were usually the very things that demanded to be seen. The pumpkins began their insidious invasion not with a bang, but with a whisper of green. They sprouted everywhere, in the front yards of perfectly manicured homes, on the grassy islands and roundabouts, even sprawling across the fields near the elementary school, their verdant tendrils creeping out of the rich, dark soil. At first, Dellen's residents, bless their naive hearts, found it charming, a quaint organic decor, a surprise gift from Mother Nature. I saw them point, smiling, cooing over the unexpected bounty. Me? My gut twisted. Nothing that appears so suddenly, so universally, and so perfectly in an otherwise tightly controlled environment is ever a gift. It's always bait. The air, though growing colder, felt strangely thick, almost viscous, especially around the burgeoning patches. A faint, earthy sweetness, like decomposing leaves in damp soil, hung heavy, an overture to something far less bucolic. I found myself instinctively checking my old wristwatch more often. The tiny tick-tock, a futile attempt to impose order on a world that was clearly losing its mind. The first hints of orange appeared, then exploded. Soon, the entire town was awash in the plump, undeniable gourds. From the porch of the small, dusty room I rented from Eliza, a woman whose eyes held a permanent tremor of suppressed anxiety. I could count dozens, maybe hundreds. Quite the prank, isn't it? Eliza had chuckled one morning, her voice thin. She was one of the few who seemed truly uneasy, her nervousness a familiar echo of my own deeply buried dread. Her home, unlike most in Dellen, felt slightly off, not haunted, not yet, just a quiet tension, like a string pulled too tight. Prank? I'd grunted, stirring my lukewarm coffee. My internal monologue, as usual, was far more cynical. Nobody plants this many pumpkins as a joke. This isn't a senior class project. It's a goddamn agricultural apocalypse. Seems a bit elaborate for a few bored teenagers. Eliza? She had simply nodded, her gaze fixed on a particularly large specimen near her rosebush. Her face, usually pale, looked almost translucent in the morning light. Her hands, clasped together, had a faint tremor. Dellen, meanwhile, embraced its new identity with disturbing zeal. The pumpkins became the town's singular topic of conversation. The local diner, a greasy spoon I frequented for its anonymity, started churning out pumpkin-spiced everything. Coffee, pancakes, even a pumpkin burger that made my stomach curdle just thinking about it. The bakery had pumpkin biscuits, the candy store pumpkin caramels. They were omnipresent, an orange tide slowly rising, swallowing Dellen whole. People began to harvest them, excitedly bringing them indoors, decorating their porches, even trying to carve faces into them. The irony, given the town's aversion to Halloween, was sickening. I found myself sketching in my small notebook more and more, not the typical monsters of my memory, but the unnervingly perfect spheres of orange, trying to capture the subtle wrongness that pulsed beneath their cheerful exteriors. It was a new habit, one I'd picked up to try and externalize the horrors I saw, to pin them to a page where I could at least pretend to control them. Eliza, my landlady, became increasingly agitated. She refused to bring any pumpkins into her home, her eyes darting nervously whenever one was mentioned. I'd seen her flinch when a neighbor offered her a carved jack-o'-lantern, a genuinely friendly gesture that had her recoiling as if from a venomous snake. "They're multiplying," she'd whispered to me one afternoon, her voice barely audible, her gaze fixed on the burgeoning patch across the street in Mrs. Finley's meticulously maintained front yard. Mrs. Finley, the local busybody, was already a legend in my short time here for her over-the-top gardening and even more over-the-top complaints about stray leaves on her sidewalk. I tried to dismiss it, to offer some semblance of comfort. "It's just growth, Eliza. They grow fast." But she shook her head, her eyes wide, a raw fear blooming in their depths that I recognized instantly. It was the fear of a rabbit cornered by a fox, the kind of primal terror that gnawed at your insides. It was the look I saw in the mirror on bad nights, when the memories, vague and indistinct, of the fire in the Sycamore Grove incident threatened to break through the carefully constructed amnesia. She clearly saw something I didn't, or wouldn't allow myself to see, something far beyond simple agriculture. That nagging spark of conscience, that damnable trait I despised in myself, flared. I couldn't just leave her to her terror. Not yet. The rattling noises started shortly after that, a subtle undercurrent at first, barely noticeable. I was on the night shift, stocking cans of peaches and corn in the cavernous, echoing warehouse. The air was thick with the metallic tang of machinery oil and the dusty sweetness of dried fruit. Sometimes, when the industrial fans whirred down, I'd hear it, a faint, almost delicate clatter, like dry gourds bumping against each other, carried on the anemic breeze from town. I'd pause, hand hovering over a box of diced tomatoes, my head cocked. My old wristwatch, its luminous dial a tiny green beacon in the dimness, was checked, then checked again. 2 a.m., 3 a.m., the witching hours. I dismissed it as squirrels or raccoons. Or maybe the cannery's ancient pipes groaning in the cold. But the sounds persisted, growing bolder, punctuated by something else, a faint, high-pitched giggling, like children's laughter carried on a capricious wind. It wasn't the innocent sound of kids playing. It was thin, reedy, too joyful, too knowing. It scraped at something deep inside me, a primal unease that resonated with the forgotten horrors of my own past. My gut clenched. This is why you don't stay anywhere too long. Vance, this is why you keep moving. One night, the laughter was closer, too close. I was lying in bed, the flimsy curtains doing little to block out the oppressive darkness of Dellen after midnight. The window was directly above my head. The rattling started, not just one or two, but a whole chorus of them, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic thumping. Then the giggling, clear as a bell, right outside my window. My blood ran cold. My go bag, always packed and ready by the door, seemed a million miles away. This wasn't some local wildlife, not some drunk teenagers. This was organized. My body froze, every muscle taut. I strained my ears, hearing distinct, light footsteps crunching on the dry grass. Too many sets of feet. My eyes, opened just a sliver, caught a flicker of warm, orange light outside, like dozens of candles had been lit simultaneously. The silence in Dellen was usually so profound, you could hear the blood rushing in your own ears. Tonight, it was punctuated by this unnatural symphony of bumps, thumps, and unsettling laughter. My curiosity, a fatal flaw that often overrode my survival instincts, got the better of me. I slipped out of bed, my feet meeting the cold wooden floor with a soft thud. I moved like a ghost, low to the ground. My worn leather jacket pulled tight around me, its familiar weight a meager comfort. I crawled to the window, slowly, agonizingly slowly, pulling back the edge of the flimsy curtain just enough to peek. The street was empty, deceptively so. The only light emanated from across the way, from Mrs. Finley's house. It was bathed in an eerie, flickering orange glow. And then I saw her, Mrs. Finley herself, hunched low in Eliza's front yard, a glint of metal in her hand, a knife. She was cutting one of the pumpkins, the one Eliza had been so wary of, the one near the rose bush, the largest, plumpest one. My stomach dropped. And then, as if on cue, she stopped, her head, incredibly slowly, lifted, her eyes, even from my darkened window, even in the dim, flickering orange light, seemed to pierce through the night, through the glass and through the flimsy curtains, and right into my skull. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was in a dark room, practically invisible. There was no way she could have seen me, but I felt it. The cold, unblinking focus of her gaze. Mrs. Finley, in daylight, was just a shrill, complaining old woman. But now, bathed in the strange, pulsing light of the pumpkins, her face a pale, unreadable mask. She was something else entirely, something ancient and predatory. I ducked back, a wave of nausea washing over me, scrambling back to my bed, pulling the threadbare blankets over my head. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to convince myself it was a dream, a trick of the flickering light and my overactive imagination. Just a dream, Vance, just a dream. But the cold dread that seeped into my bones was all too real. It was the same cold dread that had taken root in my childhood. After the fire, after Sycamore Grove, a phantom limb of fear that still throbbed, waiting for triggers like this. I didn't speak to Eliza about what I'd seen. The words felt too heavy, too impossible to voice. I almost succeeded in bearing the memory, until the insistent ring of the doorbell shattered the morning's fragile peace. My hand, without thinking, went to my wristwatch. thumb tracing the cold metal of the bezel. Then, an idiot impulse. I strode to the door and pulled it open, only to be greeted by the unnervingly wide, yellow-tinged smile of Mrs. Findlay herself. She was holding a pie, still steaming, radiating a heavy, sweet aroma of cinnamon and something sickly earthy. Pumpkin pie. "Morning, dearie," she chirped, her voice too sweet, too light. Her eyes, those cold, piercing eyes from the night before, glinted with an almost unnatural delight. "I was baking all morning and thought I'd bring you some. Fits the season, doesn't it?" She winked, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver down my spine. My mouth felt dry. I stood there, mute, a knot forming in my stomach. What do you say to a woman you saw committing an act that felt profoundly wrong, who now stood on your porch holding a baked offering? Before I could stammer out a response, Eliza materialized behind me, her face even paler than the previous day. She held herself rigid, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Oh, Mrs. Findlay," Eliza managed, her voice strained, a polite mask barely concealing the terror beneath. "How thoughtful. But really, you shouldn't have. You see, I'm quite allergic to pumpkin. A terrible shame, isn't it?" She already had her hand on the doorframe, ready to close it, to put a barrier between herself and the unnerving woman on the porch. The sheer force of her unspoken fear was palpable. I could feel it, a cold, clammy presence in the air. "Nonsense," Mrs. Findlay's voice cut through the strained politeness, sharper now with an edge of something insistent, dominant. "Let your lodger enjoy it then. He looks like he could use a good meal, doesn't he?" Her gaze, too knowing, too deliberate, swept over me. The pie, the smell of which was now making my head swim, was pushed forward. It did smell good, in a sickening sort of way. Like the best pie you'd ever eaten. A forbidden fruit, perfectly crafted to tempt and deceive. Eliza hesitated, her eyes wide with internal conflict. But Mrs. Findlay pressed the hot tray into her hands with such an unyielding, determined force that Eliza had no choice but to accept it. Without another word, Mrs. Findlay simply turned, a wide, unsettling smile still plastered to her face, and walked back to her house. The silence she left behind was heavier than any sound. Eliza slammed the door shut the moment Mrs. Findlay was out of sight. Her hands trembled as she clutched the pie tray. She walked to the kitchen, almost at a run, and without a moment's hesitation, lifted the lid of the trash can and dropped the entire pie inside. The soft splat it made was the only sound in the tense quiet. "Do not talk to that woman again. Leo, not a word. Do you understand?" she demanded, her voice tight with suppressed panic. She rarely used my name. "Eliza, what the hell is going on?" I finally managed, my own voice rougher than I intended. "I saw her last night, outside, with a knife. What was she doing?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide and piercing, the tremor in her hands now a full-blown shake. "What did you see? Was it just her? Or did you see anyone else?" The questions came in a rapid-fire whisper, laced with an urgency that chilled me to the bone. "It was just her," I lied, conveniently omitting the giggling and the faint, glowing lights, the memory of which still prickled my scalp. "Just her, cutting a pumpkin. Why are you so freaked out? What's going on?" Eliza sagged against the counter, letting out a long, ragged sigh that sounded less like relief and more like a surrender. She tried to smile, a grotesque distortion that tugged at one side of her face. "From now until November begins, you will not leave this house when the sun goes down. Leo, not for work, not for anything. Do you understand? I'm going to the shop now. Get some supplies. You stay here. Wait for me." She didn't wait for an answer, didn't give me a chance to protest. She grabbed her keys, her purse, and almost literally stormed out the door, the sound of her hurried footsteps fading quickly down the street. I was left alone in the house, the metallic tang of something akin to fear hanging in the air. A familiar taste. Eliza didn't return until the afternoon, just as the sun began its slow, inevitable descent. The moment she was back inside, the house took on the atmosphere of a bunker. She hadn't been alone in her apprehension. She'd apparently spoken to others, perhaps even to my employer. She'd made arrangements for me to not come into the cannery for the next few nights, citing a sudden, mysterious illness. My cynical mind scoffed at the flimsy excuse, but my deeper, more primal instincts understood. They worked quickly, almost frantically, sealing the house. Heavy, dark fabric was tacked over every window, plunging the rooms into a perpetual twilight. Locks, already sturdy, were reinforced. Furniture was pushed against the doors. The transformation was swift and chilling. My go-bag was still by the door, a silent accusation of my foolish lingering. "What is happening, Eliza?" I pleaded, the weariness in my voice giving way to a flicker of genuine alarm. I felt like I was trapped in a play, a grim, absurd drama, and I hadn't even been given a script. "Can you please talk to me? You're acting like the apocalypse is coming." She looked at me, her eyes heavy with unshed tears, her face a map of exhaustion and terror. "There's a reason we don't celebrate this month in Dellen. Leo," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Because when we do, when we invite it in, there's someone else who joins us." She paused, her gaze drifting to the darkened windows, as if she could see through the heavy fabric. "Someone we never, ever want to see." Her voice hitched, a sob catching in her throat. "It seems someone invited them back this year, honey, but don't worry, they'll be gone again soon." That was all I got, a vague, unsettling prophecy of doom. After the house was secured, Eliza reverted to a semblance of normalcy, a chillingly forced performance. She cooked dinner, a bland, tasteless affair. We sat at the kitchen table under the flickering, incandescent light, and she spoke of trivial things, avoiding my every attempt to bring up the suffocating weirdness that now defined our existence. I ate mechanically, my gaze constantly drawn to the obscured windows, the heavy dread coiling tighter in my gut. It was late, past midnight, when the noises returned. I was in the living room, trying to read a dog-eared paperback, Eliza dozing fitfully in an armchair opposite me. The air was thick and heavy, the silence inside the house almost suffocating. My analog wristwatch felt like a dead weight. Then, a faint rattling, the soft, rhythmic thump, and then, the giggling. This time, it wasn't distant, it was right outside the walls, almost directly behind the makeshift curtained windows. It was no longer just Mrs. Finley. I heard distinct, multiple voices, hushed and full of a dreadful glee. They sounded like children, unnatural children. Eliza's eyes snapped open. She sat bolt upright, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with naked terror. She held a trembling finger to her lips, a silent command for me to be quiet, as if any sound from us would pierce the flimsy veil of safety we'd constructed. Even I, cynical and jaded, felt a tremor run through me. This wasn't a prank. This was a siege. The noises grew louder, bolder, the rattling, like handfuls of dry seeds being shaken in an invisible gourd. The thumping, rhythmic and dull, as if something soft and heavy was being gently bumped against the outside walls. And the laughter, now clearer, higher pitched, laced with a chilling, predatory joy. It was right outside our door. Then a soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging on wood, followed by a loud, deliberate knock, thump, knock, and another, thump, knock, and another, thump, knock. It wouldn't stop. They were at the windows now too, the soft scraping sound moving from pane to pane, like an unseen hand tracing the outlines of our prison. I wanted to believe it was just a local Halloween prank gone horribly wrong, a collective effort of Dellen's frustrated teenagers. But the look on Eliza's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated horror, told me otherwise. This was something far, far worse. This was the thing Dellen tried to ignore. And it had finally arrived. Time stretched, became meaningless. Minutes, hours, I couldn't tell. The relentless knocking and scraping continued, a terrifying lullaby from the encroaching darkness. My hand found my wristwatch, tracing the face, a desperate attempt to ground myself in something real. Finally, blessedly, the sounds faded, receding into the night. When the silence returned, it was a heavy, oppressive thing, thick with unspoken dread. If you knew this would happen, I managed, my voice raspy, alien in the quiet room. Why didn't we leave? Why didn't you all just pack up and get out? Eliza turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears, a single droplet tracing a clean path through the dust on her cheek. Because we can't. Leo, she whispered, her voice breaking. Nobody leaves Dellen once October starts. Not really. The chilling finality in her voice sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Nobody leaves Dellen. I thought of the vagueness of my own past, the fuzzy edges of memory around Sycamore Grove, the constant pull to flee, yet the uncanny way I always found myself drawn back into these inexplicable horrors. Was it a curse, a magnet for the macabre? Or was I, too, trapped in some larger, unseen web? The idea was a bitter pill to swallow. Morning arrived with the same oppressive, unnatural silence. The first rays of sun, a pale, anemic light, filtered through the gaps in the fabric. Eliza, moving like an automaton, began to remove the dark coverings from the windows. As the fabric came down, revealing the world outside, I felt a fresh wave of sick disbelief wash over me. For a moment, a perverse part of me almost believed it had all been an elaborate prank, an insane psychological operation by Eliza in the town to teach me a lesson about the sacredness of Dellen's traditions, about the forbidden holiday. It felt like a perverse, cruel joke. My anger flared as I looked across the street, directly at Mrs. Finley's house. What I saw made my blood run cold, then boil. It was unrecognizable, hauntingly beautiful, undeniably macabre, and decorated with a lavishness that mocked Dellen's purported ban on Halloween. Carved pumpkins, hundreds of them, glowing with an internal, flickering light, lined the porch, the walkway, the roofline. Poisoned-looking red apples, like drops of blood, hung from the skeletal branches of the trees. Gossamer spiderwebs, impossibly large and intricate, clung to every surface, catching the anemic sunlight. The lawn was a graveyard, dozens of crudely fashioned gravestones jutting from the earth, each with a name scrawled on it, too faint to read from this distance. Skulls, bone-white and grinning, were assembled in neat, geometric patterns all around the house. It must have taken all night, an entire crew working tirelessly. I recognized the meticulous precision of Mrs. Finley's own obsessive gardening, warped into something grotesque. And then I saw the centerpiece, a figure hung from a thick rope on the porch, a witch, dressed in all black, with a tall, pointy hat and a broomstick clutched in its hand. It was too large for a typical Halloween decoration, too lifelike. A sticky, dark liquid, glinting wetly, was dripping from the end of the broom. It looked like blood. My cynical heart gave a tired thump. Of course it does, Vance, of course it does. I walked out of the house, drawn by an unwilling, morbid curiosity, my hand going to my wristwatch, checking the time that no longer seemed to matter. Dellen's other residents, a small knot of them, stood transfixed, staring at Mrs. Finley's house, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror. I got closer, the sweet decay of pumpkin and that familiar metallic tang growing stronger. My boots crunched on fallen leaves, on something else, a small orange shard of pumpkin skin, stiff and cold. My eyes fixated on the dripping liquid. It didn't just look like blood. It was blood. Dark, viscous, pooling on the porch planks. And the witch wasn't holding a broom. The stick, splintered and rough, was pierced clean through the figure's hand, through its chest. The last horrifying realization hit us all like a physical blow. The small crowd, previously murmuring, fell silent, a collective gasp. This wasn't a decorative witch hanging from a rope. It was Mrs. Finley's dead body, posed, impaled, and offered up like a grisly sacrifice. The smile on her face, that unnervingly wide, yellow-tinged smile she'd given me when she offered the pie, was still there, stretching her lips in a grotesque rictus. Mrs. Finley's house was the first. It would not be the last. The orange tide had reached its zenith, and the unspoken rule of Dellen had been shattered beyond repair. Eliza's words echoed in my mind, a chilling prophecy. When we invited in, there's someone else who joins us. Punanum, and now they were here. The town that meticulously erased Halloween from its calendar had, paradoxically, created the perfect, isolated playground for something truly ancient and hungry to finally feast. Dellen, the cozy, quiet little town, was no longer quiet. It was screaming, and I, the weary wanderer, was once again caught in the middle of it. Another fresh layer of trauma settling over the old, indistinct scars. My past, that shapeless horror that had driven me to this life of constant flight, felt more present than ever, a silent companion to the new, orange-tinged terror. Total characters. 9940. The shriek tore through the drywall, a sound born of agony and something ancient, something that peeled back the thin veneer of normalcy. My hands were already at my old wristwatch, fingers tracing the cool metal, a nervous tic I'd cultivated over too many sleepless nights and too many close calls. This wasn't just a domestic squabble spiraling out of control. The glass splintered, not in the apartment across the hall, but inside her head. I saw the shadow, the impossible growth pushing through bone, felt the psychic crackle in the air, and witnessed the horrifying shift from terror to something far, far worse. It had all started, as these things always did, with a bad decision dressed up as a temporary job, a way to keep moving, to keep the past just out of reach. Another city, another dead-end night shift, another layer of grime on the soul. This time, it was a low-paying security gig for a dilapidated apartment complex on the outskirts of what passed for a thriving metropolis these days, the kind of place where the silence was always pregnant with unseen things, where the air hung heavy with the residue of countless lives lived in quiet desperation, and where the peeling paint felt less like neglect and more like an insidious disease. I'd taken the job because it was late nights, minimal interaction, and it paid cash. The perfect setup for a ghost like me. I remember my first round on the third floor, the scuff of my worn work boots on the stained carpet. The stale smell of disinfectant couldn't quite mask the lingering aroma of cheap microwave dinners and desperation. I was checking locks, making sure no enterprising junkie had found a new way into the laundry room. When I first heard them, voices, a man and a woman, from apartment 3B. Arguments weren't unusual in places like this, par for the course. But these voices, even muffled by a few inches of plaster and a thin door, carried an unnatural edge. The woman's voice was too soft, too pleading, and the man's, a deep baritone, occasionally fractured into something else entirely. A low growl, a guttural snarl that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I chalked it up to a bad temper, maybe a few too many beers, and kept moving. My job was to keep the residents from killing each other in the hallways, not to play marriage counselor through the walls. My conscience, a rusty, seldom used tool, remained stubbornly sheathed. A week passed. The late shift was mind-numbingly dull. My only companions were the flickering fluorescent lights in the hallways, the occasional squeak of a rat in the walls, and the ever-present, low hum of the building's decaying infrastructure. I'd lean against the wall in a forgotten corner, scrolling through blurry photos of dilapidated motels on my phone, already planning my next escape. Just 2 more weeks, I told myself. Just enough to fill the gas tank and stock up on enough instant coffee to keep the world at bay for another 1,000 miles. Then I was gone, another city wiped clean from my internal map. But the voices from 3B continued their nightly ritual. Not every night, but enough for me to notice. Enough for me to subconsciously alter my patrol route. Lingering a little longer on the 3rd floor, my head tilted just so, trying to discern the nuances of the domestic drama unfolding within. It wasn't curiosity, not exactly. More like the hyper-vigilance of a veteran soldier hearing distant gunfire. You don't want to get involved, but you also need to know if it's coming your way. My watch, my old analog friend, seemed heavier those nights, its ticking a stark reminder of the slow, grinding march of time. One evening, I heard a crash. The sound of breaking glass, sharp and violent, sliced through the usual hum of the building. My stomach twisted. "Don't get involved, Vance. It's not your fight." My usual mantra. But then the woman's cry, a raw, choked sob, followed by a voice, the man's, that had completely lost its human cadence. It was deeper, rougher, like rocks grinding together, laced with a venom that wasn't just anger, it was hate. A primal, consuming hate that felt older than the building, older than the city, older than me. It reminded me, vaguely, of another sound I'd heard, a whisper in a snow-choked mountain pass. Too cold, too close, from a phantom that shouldn't have been there. A shiver, colder than any winter wind, traced a path down my spine. My reluctant conscience, that festering wound in my soul, chose that moment to act up. It screamed at me. Someone is in pain. Someone needs help. I hated that voice. I'd learned, the hard way, that helping rarely ended well for Leo Vance. It just meant more scars, more trauma to add to the growing pile in my head. But the scream, it was too much. It clawed at something deep inside me, something I usually kept buried under layers of cynicism and self-preservation. Maybe it was the memory of a past failure, a person I couldn't save, a fire I couldn't stop. The details were still fuzzy, locked behind a mental block, but the feeling lingered, a constant, dull ache of guilt. I found myself outside apartment 3B. My hand hovered over the door, knuckles brushing the cold metal of the handle. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drum solo of dread. The cheap wood of the door felt thin, fragile, barely a barrier. I could hear the man's voice, now a full-blown roar, punctuated by the woman's whimpers. "You think you're lonely?" he snarled, the voice somehow louder, clearer, despite the barrier. Then another crash, a heavier sound this time, something solid hitting a wall. "You know what, bitch?" My breath hitched. This wasn't just an argument, this was a demolition. And the voice, it was wrong. Too much bass, too much raw, unadulterated aggression. It wasn't just a man yelling. It was something else speaking through him. I'd seen it before, or something like it. Not like this, not exactly, but enough to know the chilling difference between human rage and something far, far worse, like the way Ethan's eyes had gone utterly dead before he started carving, or Olivia's unsettling stillness before her true nature unraveled. My internal monologue, usually so quick with a sarcastic quip, was silent, replaced by a cold dread that numbed my extremities. Your company is far from satisfying. What with your stupid goddamn rants about inequality, this injustice, that, the voice mocked, shifting now, strangely, into a patronizingly high-pitched, whining tone. It was a grotesque mimicry, designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. You ever stop and think you're just making all that shit up? Or maybe things are the way they are for a reason, to keep you safe? My hand was still on the doorknob, but I didn't turn it. I couldn't. Not yet. I was a man who'd seen things that didn't fit into any sane worldview. But even I hesitated. This wasn't just a threat. It was a psychological attack, a dismantling of someone's reality. It felt intimate, violating. The woman's gasps were growing more frantic, choked, as if she were trying to hold back something enormous, something on the verge of erupting. Just how many times do I have to tell you this until it gets through your thick, fat skull? He is not your friend. The voice seethed, its words sharp as daggers, radiating a palpable sense of possession, of absolute control. All he wants from you is what every man wants from every woman, and what he wants is mine. That last word, mine, was delivered with a possessiveness that chilled me to the bone. And then, a new sound. A wet, sickening squelch. Not the sound of a fist or a body hitting a wall. It was something internal, something organic, a sound that made my stomach lurch. And with it, a faint, nauseating odor began to seep from under the door. Not human waste, not garbage. Something older, like a cellar that had been locked for centuries, filled with damp earth and something that had rotted and festered beneath it. The smell of decay, of slow, creeping corruption. My hand flew to my mouth instinctively to ward off the stench. I heard the woman's muffled yelp of pain, sharp and immediate. What the fuck? Her voice, though still choked, had changed. It had a new edge, a new resonance. And then, the male voice, the demon's voice, colder, more clinical, even as it was laced with a cruel satisfaction. What the fuck is wrong with you? That was it. The line. My reluctant conscience, having dragged me this far, finally shoved me over the edge. No more. This was beyond domestic dispute. This was something inhuman, preying on the vulnerable, and my soul, as scarred as it was, couldn't stand by. I didn't care about the consequences, about the fresh trauma. I couldn't just walk away and let whatever that thing was finish its work. Not after all I'd seen, all I'd barely survived. I gripped the doorknob. It was cold, slimy almost, though I knew it was just my clammy hand. I twisted it. The lock clicked with surprising ease. The door swung inward on well-oiled hinges, revealing a scene that solidified every horror I had ever witnessed, every nightmare that had ever clawed its way from my subconscious into the waking world. The apartment was a wreck. A glass lay shattered against one wall, sparkling shards scattered like malevolent diamonds on the worn carpet. A framed photograph, likely of the couple, lay face down near the doorway, its glass cover splintered. The air was thick with the cloying, putrid scent I detected, now stronger, tinged with something metallic, coppery, blood, and there they were. Daniel, the man, stood by the far wall, his face a mask of shock, eyes wide, mouth agape, seemingly transfixed by the woman on the floor. She was huddled against the base of the sofa, knees pulled tight to her chest, trembling, but it wasn't just fear that racked her. Her hands were pressed against her forehead, and between her fingers, I could see two dark, gnarled protrusions, like black branches tearing through skin. They were horns, raw, bleeding, utterly impossible. And then I saw her fingernails, elongated, yellowed, morphing into wicked claws before my very eyes. Her eyes, fixed on her transformed hands, were no longer the soft, muted color I'd imagined. They were wide, vacant, and unsettlingly white. The man, Daniel, finally stirred, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Love, what's happened to you?" And then the woman, the victim, unleashed it. Her body convulsed, a wave of raw, burning rage washing over her. The sound that ripped from her throat was not human. It was a primordial shriek, A blaring, guttural roar that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. The framed photographs on the wall, already trembling, rattled violently, and one, already cracked, exploded outward, showering the room with splinters of glass. "What the fuck is wrong with me?" she screamed, her voice deepening, becoming monstrous, yet still laced with a horrifying anguish. Her entire skull seemed to contort, a fresh, sickening tearing sound accompanying the visible ripping of flesh around the base of the horns. What the fuck is wrong with me?" It was a revelation, delivered with the force of a physical blow. The demon hadn't just possessed Daniel, it had created one in her, or awakened it, or perhaps it had simply been transferred. The implications made my blood run cold. Daniel, the supposed host, the one who was supposed to be the monster, recoiled, stumbling backwards, genuine terror etched on his features. He was no longer possessed, he was just a man, witnessing the horrifying transformation of the woman he claimed to love. The woman's new monstrous face turned towards me, her eyes, those vacant white orbs, locking onto mine. A flicker of something ancient and terrible burned in their depths, something that recognized me, perhaps, as another vessel of trauma, another magnet for the darkness that permeated this world. I felt a cold surge of understanding, of shared fate. "Fuck you, you fucking fuck," she yelled, her voice a chorus of pure fury and deep, shattering pain. "Just shut up, please." And then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the rage in her seemed to coil back, the horns, still black and gnarled, twisted inward, seeming to retract, though the fresh wounds continued to ooze. Her claws seemed to shrink, her eyes flickered with a returning, agonizing humanity, still white, still vacant, but no longer radiating primal fury. She collapsed onto the floor, a heap of human misery. Daniel, cautious, almost hesitant, crept towards her, perching on the edge of the mattress. His voice was soft, almost soothing, a deceptive lullaby that made my stomach churn. "No, love, you aren't a monster. You are strong, but you are damaged." His eyes, however, held a flicker of something unreadable, something calculating beneath the veneer of concern. "It looks like you have a demon, too, probably put inside you by one of those guys with their bad intentions." He sighed, pushing her bangs back, a disturbingly intimate gesture. "It's fate, love, for us to be together. I will fix you, and I will protect you from the demon inside of you. I'm the only one who understands what it's like to have one, so only I can save you from it, save you from yourself." I stood there, frozen in the doorway, my go bag slung over my shoulder, my hand still gripping the cool metal of my wristwatch, turning the crown aimlessly. The stench of rot still hung heavy in the air. The shattered glass glittered, and the words, Daniel's words, echoed in the apartment, a twisted sermon of control and manipulation. My initial surge of reluctant conscience had propelled me here, had forced me to witness this sickening display. Now, it was replaced by something far more cynical, far more weary. This wasn't just a demonic possession. This was a psychological battlefield, a twisted form of abuse cloaked in supernatural horror. Daniel wasn't just a victim. He was a manipulator, perhaps a true monster, exploiting the very real demonic presence to further his control, to convince her that she was broken and only he could fix her. He had offered her a sick parody of salvation, chaining her to him with invisible binds, far stronger than any physical restraint. And she, the victim, was now just another link in the chain, another monster in the making. The realization settled heavy in my gut. My life, my curse, had led me to witness yet another horror, another facet of the endless darkness that clung to the edges of humanity. The things I'd seen on the road, the phantom hitchhiker, Ethan's depravity, Olivia's skin collection, they were all different notes in the same terrifying symphony. People turning into monsters, or revealing the monsters that had always been lurking beneath the skin. And often, it was the normal ones, the quiet ones, the ones offering love and protection, who were the most insidious. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. I'd seen enough. My job here wasn't to intervene. Not truly. It was to witness, to observe, to add another layer to the trauma that defined my existence. My fatal flaw, my reluctant conscience had gotten me in, and now my instinct for survival, honed by years of running, was screaming at me to get out. My hand tightened on my watch, the cold metal a small anchor point in the churning chaos. I turned slowly, my boots crunching softly on the glass shards near the door. I didn't look back at them, at the broken woman and the smiling devil in human skin. The air in the hallway felt suddenly lighter, cleaner, though I knew it was an illusion. The stench of rot, the echo of the screams, the image of those black, gnarled horns erupting from a human skull, they were already etched onto the walls of my mind. Another permanent fixture in the Leo Vance Chronicles, just another ghost to keep me company on the lonely road ahead. I closed the door to apartment 3B, a quiet click that sealed away a fresh hell. My work shift wasn't over, but I knew I'd be gone by dawn. This city, like all the others, had just become too loud, too heavy, too much like home. Character count 9,876. The taste lingered on my tongue, metallic and strangely sweet, like a whisper of forbidden knowledge. Every bite had been a step closer to the abyss, and now, the flickering television screen in the motel room blared the headline, painting the horror in stark, undeniable strokes. Missing family of 3. My stomach clenched, not with revulsion, but with a horrifying, self-loathing recognition. A cold, insidious truth was settling in my gut, one that made me want to claw my own skin off. It was the same taste, the same sick, guilty pleasure that whispered of unspeakable things. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to erase the image of the smiling man with blood on his hands. But his voice echoed in the hollow space behind my eyelids, offering mystery meatloaf. The words were a vile, culinary punchline, and I was the unwitting, complicit guest at the table. It had all started, as these things always do, with a perfectly normal, annoyingly persistent friend, a ridiculously cheap menu, and the deceptive scent of grease and false promise, pulling me into yet another corner of this twisted map I seemed fated to walk. The small town in Missouri was exactly the kind of place I usually went out of my way to avoid. Too many eyes, too many familiar faces, too many opportunities for the past to catch up or for new horrors to manifest. I preferred the anonymity of highways and rest stops, the transient nature of a life lived between truck stops and dilapidated motels. But my current gig, a graveyard shift at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of town, had me stuck for the foreseeable future. A temporary prison, I told myself, just until the next payroll cleared and I could point the old pickup towards another horizon. The town itself was a postcard of American folksiness. All clapboard houses and the scent of pine needles from the nearby national park. People knew each other's names, or so it seemed, waving from porch swings and pickup trucks. It was the kind of community that made my skin crawl. Tight-knit usually meant too close for comfort, too many secrets buried beneath that manicured lawn of normalcy. Then, Sam's Smash Burgers and More showed up. A new joint, opened by some tourist who decided to plant roots. The talk around the warehouse break room was all about it, mostly positive, sprinkled with a few unsettling whispers. Weird taste. Found a hair. Thought I saw a ring. I'd heard it all before. The usual gripes about any new establishment. But then someone mentioned a tooth, a human molar, supposedly. That got my attention, not because I believed it, but because it had the distinct tang of the truly improbable, the kind of story that usually presaged a much nastier reality. The owner, Sam, a perpetually smiling man, had apparently dismissed it all as a conspiracy by the locals to keep outsiders out. A notion so ludicrous it almost looped back around to believable. Almost. Come on, Leo, man. You gotta try it, Trey insisted, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. Trey was another reason I was stuck here. He was my shift supervisor, a genuinely good guy who had taken a shine to me, despite my best efforts to remain a polite, professional enigma. He kept pushing, kept badgering, rattling off how amazing the food was. Seriously, dude, 15 times already, and I've never found anything weird. Sam's a good guy. He clasped his hands together in mock prayer, his eyes wide. I stared at him, my gaze lingering a moment too long on his friendly, open face. A cold sliver of memory snaked through me. The easy trust I'd once placed in a familiar face, only to find a hollow, monstrous imitation beneath. Mitch. Goddamn Mitch. The paranoia was a constant companion now, a low hum beneath the surface of my consciousness. It flared brightest when someone was too nice, too insistent. 15 time, I echoed, the words tasting like ash. You're either an idiot savant for cheap eats, or you've developed an iron constitution for local legends. Trey laughed, oblivious, and for a second, I felt a pang of something akin to guilt for my dark thoughts. He was just a regular guy. Probably. Okay. I relented, a sigh escaping me that tasted of resignation. Fine, but only to shut you up. And if I find a toenail in my fries, I'm blaming you. We shared a strained laugh, mine more of a grimace, and headed out. Buster was back at the motel. Thank God. No way I was dragging him into another potential nightmare. He was probably curled up on the passenger seat of the truck, waiting for me to emerge from another one of my self-inflicted detours into the bizarre. My worn leather jacket felt heavier than usual, a familiar comfort and a constant reminder of the burdens I carried. I checked my analog wristwatch, more out of habit than need, the second hand sweeping its eternal, indifferent arc. 10 past 5. Time meant nothing when you were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sam's smash burgers and more was something. From the outside, it looked like a repurposed roadside diner from the 70s, with a few sun-bleached picnic tables out front. The umbrellas faded like old bruises. Inside, it was clear what it had been: a laundromat, a brightly lit, slightly too clean laundromat, with a walled-off kitchen section where the massive commercial dryers once stood. The lingering scent of fabric softener was doing battle with the smell of sizzling grease, creating a bizarre olfactory cocktail. Laundry and burger, I muttered, shaking my head. Only in America. Trey, meanwhile, was already at the counter, beaming at the menu tacked up behind the register. It was short, a sparse list of classics: single, double, triple cheeseburgers, pork steak, house fries, fried pickles, and chili. Everything was listed at a shocking $2. $2. My cynical alarm bells started ringing like a fire truck. Nothing was that cheap without a catch. Nothing. The only things that came free in my world were pain and regret. This price felt like a challenge, an insult to the laws of economics, a blatant red flag fluttering in a non-existent breeze. You go first, I told Trey, my stomach rumbling in protest against my unease. My appetite had a nasty habit of ignoring my brain's warnings. He ordered a double cheeseburger, house fries, and a fried pickle. Fried? A pickle? I managed, my brow furrowing. My brain was still trying to compute the economics of $2 everything. Yo, Leo, wake up, man. Stop spacing out, weirdo. Trey laughed, lightly grabbing my shoulder. I flinched, almost imperceptibly, at the touch. My eyes narrowed, scanning his face for any tell, any flicker of something else. Nothing. Just Trey, good old oblivious Trey, my self-preservation instinct, honed by years of running from unseen things, was a nagging buzz in my skull. I felt like prey in a field of flowers, every petal a potential trap. I forced my attention back to the menu. $2 for anything. It screamed desperate or too good to be true, or both. My gaze lingered on the chili and fries. Can I get the chili and the fries? I asked, my voice a little rougher than I intended. Like, can you combine the two to make chili fries? The man behind the counter, Sam, was an older guy, maybe early 60s, with a round, pleasant face and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His grin was wide, almost unnaturally so, like a mask that had been stretched too far. It brought a shiver down my spine, a faint echo of the chilling artistry I'd witnessed in that pristine, antique-filled house where beauty was just a mask for decay. Olivia, her house had been a meticulously curated tableau, just like this man's smile felt curated. Certainly, Sam boomed, his voice ridiculously ebullient. It'll be about 30 minutes, okay? We make everything fresh and hot. 30 minutes. For chili fries. It was a long time for a fast food joint, but if everything was indeed fresh, I nodded. Trey nodded, and we found a booth. The booths were red vinyl, worn smooth in patches, probably from decades of restless laundromat patrons. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a clinical glow on the already sterile-looking interior. We hadn't been sitting for long when the smell hit us. Not just the faint, battling odors of fabric softener and old grease. This was something else, a richer, deeper, more primal aroma. The scent of frying meat, yes, but also something earthy, almost gamey. It was intoxicating, a heavy, musky cloud that seemed to bypass my nose and go straight for some ancient, lizard brain part of me. It instantly brought back a flood of half-formed memories, sensations more than images. A warmth, a feeling of security, a deep animal satisfaction. My mind, ever the masochist, immediately conjured a phantom ache, a memory of a time before the world went sideways. My father, a man I hadn't thought about in years, not willingly. He'd cooked, sometimes, big, hearty meals. I remembered the smile, broad and genuine, as he'd served up plates, my mother with her cheap camera, snapping photos. He dreamed of his own restaurant, a vision that had evaporated when the bank denied his loan. Then had come the bottles, the depression, the quiet house turning into a war zone, the fear that coiled in my gut every time I heard his heavy footsteps, the car wreck, the screaming, my mother kicking him out, the silence that followed, both blessed and damning. The universe, I reflected, was just a series of bad deals, one after another. No matter how good something smelled or felt, the price was always astronomical. 45 minutes later, not 30, a woman appeared, carrying our plates. She was young, maybe our age, with a perpetually tired expression that reminded me of my own face in the mirror most mornings. She placed the plates in front of us, and I found myself staring. The food looked artful. No, artful wasn't right. It looked perfect. The kind of perfect that felt wrong, like it had been designed by a surgeon, not a short-order cook. Every fry was placed with deliberate precision, every dollop of chili a miniature peak on a mountain range of golden potato. The cheese was melted exactly right, a shimmering blanket. It was immaculate, almost disturbingly so. "You see, bro, don't that shit look good?" Trey exclaimed, practically drooling. He lifted his burger, the cheese pulling in molten strings, the patties perfectly smashed, glistening with juice. The bun, too, was buttery, fluffy, with just the right amount of onion and lettuce peeking out. He was right. It looked impossibly good. Almost too good, like a prop in a horror movie, designed to lull the unsuspecting victim. The smile on Sam's face, wide and too bright, brought me back to Ethan, that charmer in the woods, whose appetites were far more particular than anyone could have guessed. He'd seemed so normal. This place felt the same. My chili fries were steaming, radiating a comforting warmth. The chili was thick, almost meaty, coating the fries perfectly. The fries themselves, despite being submerged in the concoction, were still stiff, crunchy on the outside, with soft, creamy potato on the inside. They were clearly hand-cut, thick and irregular, and coated in a seasoning that I couldn't quite place, familiar, yet alien. It prickled at the back of my throat, a subtle, addictive hum. I took a bite, then another, and another. The cascade of flavors was immediate, overwhelming, distracting. It was savory, rich, deeply umami, with a subtle sweetness that I couldn't pinpoint. My brain, usually a fortress of cynicism and paranoia, simply melted under the onslaught. It was delicious, horrifyingly, addictively delicious. For $2, the sheer absurdity of it should have been a red flashing light, but my senses were hijacked. I ate, shoveling the chili fries into my mouth, barely registering Trey's delighted slurping across from me. It was a compulsion, a need, a deep animal satisfaction that bordered on primal. The plate was almost empty before I even realized it. "Ha ha, told you this place is the best in town," Trey said, his mouth half full. "Yeah, no kidding," I mumbled, my voice thick. "This place, it's something else. The way the food was made, plated, immaculate. I'd believe it if this guy was a Michelin star chef." Trey just grinned. "I don't know who Michelin is or why their stars matter, but this food is bussin'." He said it with unearned confidence, perfectly unironically. And for a moment, I almost laughed. Almost. But then the food hit me, a wave of post-meal lethargy and a strange, almost shameful satisfaction. It was like I'd just eaten something I shouldn't have, something forbidden. We finished, pushing the empty plates across the table. When we stood to return them to the counter, that's when I heard it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible beneath the low hum of the laundromat dryers and the clatter from the kitchen. A muffled cry, like someone was trying to yell, but their voice was swallowed by something thick, heavy, a plea, a choked gasp. My blood ran cold. The comfortable haze from the food evaporated, replaced by a sudden, brutal clarity. My ears strained, trying to isolate the sound, to make sense of it. The desperate, muffled sounds from the kitchen clawed at the edges of my hearing, a familiar echo of that cold, dead whisper on the mountain pass, or the pleas I'd heard from behind sealed doors. The kind of sound that meant someone was in trouble, the kind of sound I usually ran from. My stomach nodded. Damn that reluctant conscience of mine. "Hey, bro," I asked Trey, my voice low, barely a whisper. My hand went to my wrist, my fingers tracing the cold metal of my watch, a grounding tick. "Do you hear that? It sounds like someone trying to yell." Trey paused, his brow furrowed. He tilted his head, listening, then he shrugged, dismissing it. "Nah, I don't hear a thing. I think you're just crazy, 'cause I was right. And you're trying to find something wrong with this place." He laughed, a short, snickering sound. The kind of sound normal people made when faced with something abnormal. The kind of sound that made me want to scream. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. That I was just crazy. That my brain, perpetually haunted, was manufacturing horrors where none existed. It was easier to think that. It always was. Why would anyone risk this? Risk everything. For a $2 burger joint? The thought was too insane. Too monstrous. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the clinging dread. "Let's just go," I said, my voice flat. My go bag, always packed in the truck, suddenly felt miles away, unreachable. As we reached the door, Sam, the owner, emerged from the kitchen. He was smiling again, that same too wide, stretched smile, but this time, something else was evident. His hand, as he waved us out, was covered in blood. Not just a smear, but a wet, glistening coat. Too much. Far too much for a normal kitchen accident. The smell of something metallic, coppery, distinct from the grease, wafted from him. It made my gorge rise. "Come back later for our mystery meatloaf." "Waikiki," he called out, his voice booming with exaggerated cheer. A macabre joke that only he seemed to understand. A cold shiver, colder than any winter wind, ran down my spine. This wasn't a joke. This was a statement. The metallic tang, the unsettling sweetness of the food, the muffled screams, the too cheap prices, the missing tooth, the bloody hand. It all clicked into place with horrifying, sickening clarity. Another farm, another harvest, just a different kind of meat, same in different cosmic butchers. The thought chilled me to the bone, not just because of the gruesome implication, but because it resonated with a deeper, more profound dread, a chilling echo of that impossible, boundless farm I'd glimpsed in my worst moments, where existence itself felt like nothing more than a carefully curated feeding ground for unspeakable things. I mumbled a goodbye, my voice catching in my throat, and practically dragged Trey out the door. My eyes scanned the street, searching for anything, anyone, but the world outside felt just as oblivious as Trey. This town, like so many others, was just a stage for the everyday monstrous. Last night, curled on the lumpy mattress in my motel room, I watched the local news. My stomach was still a churning knot of unease, my mind replaying the image of Sam's bloody hand, the echo of those muffled cries. The local news anchor, her face grim, reported, "A vacationing family of 3 went missing earlier this week in our little town. Their car was found at the junkyard with nothing but bloodstains inside it. If you have any information, please call our helpline." My gaze drifted from the TV screen to the empty food container on the bedside table. My chili fries, the sickeningly delicious $2 chili fries, the taste, the weird, addictive, unforgettable taste. I felt sick, bone deep, soul sick. My hands started to tremble. I closed my eyes, trying to force the question from my mind, but it hammered against the inside of my skull, a relentless, horrifying drumbeat. Am I crazy, or does human meat actually taste good? The thought was a venomous serpent coiling in my gut, leaving a trail of ash and self-loathing. I refused to go back to that restaurant. I had to refuse, but a part of me, a dark, primal, disgusted part, knew the answer to that question, and it was the most horrifying truth of all. The biting cold was a lead blanket, pressing down, stealing the last vestiges of warmth from my bones. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent drumbeat behind my eyes, and the metallic tang of fear was a familiar coppery taste on my tongue. I was vaguely aware of rough hands, or something that felt like hands, dragging me, the frozen ground scraping against my cheek. My wrists were raw, bound tight with what felt like coarse rope, digging into the flesh. Above me, the air smelled of damp earth, pine, and something else, something metallic and rotten, like a slaughterhouse after a hot day. My eyes, and when I forced them open, saw only the blurred underside of a massive, gaunt form, legs like stilts, moving with an unnatural, predatory grace. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my fading consciousness. But the terror was old, a well-worn path in my mind. This wasn't my first rodeo with the grotesque, just a new, particularly scenic arena for the carnage. My fingers, numb with cold and the constricted circulation, brushed against the familiar, comforting bulk of my worn leather jacket, and within its inner pocket, a sliver of hope, sharp and improbable. My Swiss Army knife. The world reeled, the trees a blur, the growls of my captors a guttural symphony. But my mind, ever the survivor, clung to that one impossible, desperate detail. It had all started, as these things always did, with a wrong turn and a stubborn refusal to mind my own goddamn business. Another Tuesday, another temporary gig, another small, forgotten town in the hinterlands of what passed for civilization. This time, a night shift at a logging company warehouse, hauling timber in the belly of the Catskills. The money was just enough to keep the old sedan running, the tank full, and the go bag perpetually ready by the door of whatever cheap motel room I was currently inhabiting. I wasn't here for the scenery. I was here because the mountains were remote, anonymous, and far from everything else that kept trying to catch up with me. Frank was the wild card, a relic from a past life I usually kept buried under layers of cynicism and cheap coffee. We'd known each other since high school, a lifetime ago, and he had that infectious, unearned optimism that grated on my nerves, but somehow, impossibly, still drew me in. He called me out of the blue, chirpy and annoyingly enthusiastic about a 3-day winter camping trip in the big Indian wilderness. Just like old times. Leo, get some fresh air. Clear your head. Clear my head. My head was a filing cabinet of horrors, and I preferred it hermetically sealed. But there was a persistent note of genuine camaraderie in his voice, and my ever-present, self-loathing conscience, the one that got me into trouble more often than not, had pricked. So, I'd said yes. Against my better judgment, against every single instinct screaming at me to keep driving, to stay isolated and safe in my little steel bubble of self-imposed exile. The drive into the Catskills themselves was a study in deceptive beauty. Jagged peaks draped in snow, pine trees standing sentinel like frosted ghosts. A picture postcard designed to lure in the unwary. I'd seen enough beauty curdled into nightmare to know better. This wasn't peaceful or awe-inspiring to me. It was a mausoleum of rock and ice, ancient and indifferent, capable of swallowing you whole without a trace. My hand instinctively went to my old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick more than a functional check. 3:15, still too much daylight for my comfort. We pulled into a gas station in some forgotten hamlet just outside the wilderness boundary, the kind of place where the air smells of stale coffee, diesel, and desperation. The bell above the door jingled a flat, tuneless note as we stepped inside. The cashier, a man whose face was a roadmap of worry lines, was wiping down the counter with a rag that looked suspiciously like it had seen better days in a grease pit. He watched us with an intensity that went beyond simple customer service. His gaze snagged on my worn leather jacket, then on the camping gear visible in the back of my car through the window. He seemed to shrink, shoulders hunching, eyes wide with something akin to dread. "Everything all right, buddy?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than intended. It was a stupid question, an unnecessary interaction, but my damn conscience twinged again. The guy looked genuinely distressed. He offered a weak, thin-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. You two heading into the big Indian wilderness?" His voice was raspy, laced with an unsettling tremor. Frank, ever the oblivious optimist, chirped, "That's the plan. 3 days of glorious nature, away from all the noise." The cashier went pale, his already sallow complexion draining to a sickly gray. He started wringing the rag in his hands, twisting it until the knuckles showed white. "Listen," he whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. "I wouldn't. Not out there. Not this time of year." He glanced nervously at the dusty window. "Folks, they go missing. More than usual. 2 years now. Steady stream of disappearances. No trace." He lowered his voice further, as if the very air might carry his words to something lurking beyond the glass. "It's the ghoul hound, they say, up in the mountains. Not a creature you want to meet." Frank scoffed, a little too loudly. "The ghoul hound? Come on, man, that's just some urban legend. Stick legs and a cross face? You pulling our leg?" But the cashier shook his head, his eyes pleading. "It ain't no legend to the ones who don't come back. Stay at a resort. Boys, there's plenty of nice ones. Don't go into the wilderness." My gut, that old, reliable barometer of impending disaster, was screaming. Every fiber of my being urged me to turn the car around, drive straight back to whatever anonymous motel room I'd left that morning. This was exactly the kind of setup I specialized in avoiding. A vague warning, a local legend, a place that just felt wrong. But Frank was already shaking his head, a dismissive smile playing on his lips. And that damn conscience, the one that sometimes felt less like a moral compass and more like a magnet for bad decisions, nagged at me. Frank was excited. I'd promised. And besides, I'd survived worse. Probably. "We appreciate the warning, sir," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "But we'll be fine." I paid for the gas, my fingers brushing the cold, slick banknotes. The cashier watched us go, a look of profound resignation etched onto his face. I could almost hear him thinking, "Another couple of idiots." I didn't blame him. "See?" Frank said as we pulled away. "Just some local trying to spook us, probably bored out of his mind." "Or," I countered, adjusting the rearview mirror, checking for nothing in particular, "he's seen too much. Like a lot of people in these forgotten corners of the world." The comment hung in the stale air of the car, heavy with unspoken implications. My past wasn't just vague to others. There were parts of it even I couldn't fully access. Blank spots where the worst of it had burrowed deep and hidden. But the feeling of it, the constant gnawing dread, that was always with me. This cashier's face, full of the same tired horror I sometimes saw in the mirror, was a little too familiar. 20 minutes later, we were off the main road, bouncing down a snow-packed logging trail. The air grew colder, sharper, biting at exposed skin. The light, already fading, seemed to dim even faster here, swallowed by the towering, snow-laden pines. We found our spot, an empty valley, surprisingly sheltered, a 15-minute drive from the Bel Air ski resort. "Perfect," Frank declared, surveying the pristine, undisturbed snow. "Quiet, but not too far from civilization." I just grunted, scanning the tree line, searching for any telltale sign of wrongness. The wind, a mournful whisper, tugged at the branches, a low, sighing sound that vibrated through the silence. It wasn't comforting. It was the sound of a place holding its breath. We set up the tent, racing against the dying light. My movements were automatic, efficient. Frank, meanwhile, was chattering about the stars, about the pure air, about how rejuvenating this was. Rejuvenating. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I kept my senses peeled, listening to the subtle creaks of the frozen earth, the rustle of dry leaves caught in the wind. Nothing. Just the vast, empty stillness of a place that felt profoundly old. We managed to get the tent up just as the last sliver of weak, winter sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and sullen gray. We decided against a fire, the risk of attracting unwanted attention outweighing the meager warmth it might provide. The first night was uneventful, alarmingly so. I slept in snatches, a light, restless sleep born of years of vigilance. Every snap of a twig, every murmur of the wind, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. But there was nothing. No animal sounds beyond the distant hoot of an owl, no strange rustlings. The tent was a flimsy shield, but for one night it seemed to hold. In the morning, the stars were a diamond dust scattering across a black canvas, beautiful and uncaring. When we finally crawled out, stretching cramped muscles, the first thing I noticed was the ground around the tent, or rather, the prints in the ground. They were thin, disturbingly elongated paw prints, like something out of a child's nightmare drawing, crisscrossing the snow with unsettling precision. They seemed to appear from nowhere, ending abruptly as if the creature had simply ceased to exist. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, certainly not bear or deer. And they were everywhere. Frank, his initial cheer evaporating, stared at them, his face pale. "Ghoulhound prints," he whispered, the earlier scoff forgotten. "Maybe," I conceded, my voice flat. My hand went to my watch again, checking nothing. It was too early for this. The unease, which had momentarily receded, came back with a vengeance, cold and clammy. We knew we couldn't do anything about the prints. We were already here. We brushed them aside, a foolish attempt to ignore the undeniable, and headed for the ski resort. Another temporary escape from a reality that was beginning to feel distinctly off-kilter. The ski day was a blur of icy wind and forced cheer. My mind kept replaying the image of those prints, each thin, precise indentation a quiet taunt. My usual coping mechanism, detached observation, was working overtime, but it only amplified the growing dread. I found myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see a gaunt, impossibly thin figure watching us from the shadows. The mountains felt heavier now, less pristine, more ancient and predatory. We returned to the camp as dusk began to bleed across the sky. 30 minutes of light, maybe 40 if we were lucky. Not enough time. My heart sank, a lead weight in my chest. And then I saw it. The tent. It wasn't collapsed. It wasn't shredded by an animal. It was taken apart, every pole separated, every fabric panel meticulously unfolded and laid flat on the snow. The stakes, pulled from the frozen earth, were neatly arranged beside them. It was done with an unnatural precision, as if by a meticulous, unseen hand. "What the hell?" Frank breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "Someone's messing with us." But my eyes were already scanning the fresh snow. Not a single human footprint, only more of those thin, elongated paw prints, crisscrossing the campsite, weaving in and out of where the tent had been. A cold, hard knot of fear tightened in my stomach. No human could have done this without leaving a trace, especially not in fresh snow. This wasn't some bored local kid playing a prank. This was something else, something that moved without leaving a mark, something that disassembled tents with eerie, almost surgical, accuracy. The light was failing fast. The air grew colder, a bone-deep chill that no amount of clothing could ward off. We were in the middle of nowhere, cell service non-existent. Our only option was to reassemble the tent and hunker down. Against my better judgment, against every survival instinct I possessed, my damn conscience whispered, "Frank is here. You brought him here. You have to make sure he's safe." So we worked in hurried, frantic silence, our breath pluming in the frigid air, the ghostly paw prints circling us like an unseen presence. We decided, without speaking, to forego a fire tonight. There was no way we were going to risk attracting more attention than we already had. Inside the tent, zipped tight against the encroaching darkness, the silence was oppressive. It wasn't the natural silence of a wilderness night. It was a heavy, watchful silence, like the air itself was holding its breath. I sat cross-legged, my bear spray clutched in one hand, the cold metal of my largest hunting knife a reassuring weight in the other. Frank was huddled opposite me, eyes wide, breath shallow. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The first sound came around midnight, a low guttural growl that vibrated through the frozen earth, through the flimsy tent fabric, and directly into my chest. It wasn't the roar of a bear or the snarl of a wolf. It was something deeper, something ancient and malevolent, a sound that seemed to scrape against the very fabric of reality. It was the sound the gas station cashier had warned us about, the sound of the ghoul hound. Frank's eyes, caught in the dim glow of my phone screen, now only a flickering flashlight, the service long gone, mirrored my own horror. He seemed to shrink into himself, a deer caught in headlights. Freeze. My body, however, was wired differently. Years of living on the knife edge of the unexplained had honed my instincts. Fight, or at least prepare to. My hand tightened on the bear spray, my thumb hovering over the trigger. The growl grew louder, circling the tent, a low, predatory hum that seemed to shake the air around us. Then, the sound of movement, not heavy footfalls, but a slithering, skittering sound, like long, thin limbs dragging themselves across the snow. It was on us, or around us. And then, the zipper. It began slowly, excruciatingly. A faint rasping sound, barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. Sip. One tooth, then another, disengaging. It wasn't a sudden tear, not a panicked ripping. This was deliberate, torturous. It was playing with us. Sup. The sound hovered directly over our heads, directly above the center seam of the tent, as if whatever was out there knew exactly where we were. And as it unzipped, a faint, ragged breathing sound accompanied it, wet and shallow, like something struggling to draw air through a throat full of grit. I aimed the bear spray at the zipper line, my finger white on the trigger. Frank was motionless, eyes fixed on the slow, agonizing descent of the zipper pull. We sat there, two terrified animals in a flimsy cage, waiting for the predator to make its move. The silence between each sip-ready was worse than the sound itself, pregnant with anticipation, stretching like a rubber band about to snap. I checked my watch, a useless gesture, 12:15. It felt like hours had passed since the first growl. The zipper continued its slow, horrifying journey, an inch at a time, until it reached the base. Then, with a sudden, jarring rip, the entire seam tore open, the fabric splitting with a sound like canvas ripping under immense pressure. A dark, jagged rift appeared, revealing only the absolute blackness of the night beyond. No star, no moon. The sky was an empty void. Whatever was out there had blotted out the entire world. I tensed, every muscle screaming, waiting for a grotesque face, a razor-clawed hand, to plunge through the opening, but nothing came. The blackness just sat there, impenetrable, taunting. The ragged breathing, however, was now closer, just inches from the opening, hovering. It was a game, a cat playing with its food, and we were the mice. This agonizing waiting game went on for what felt like an eternity. An hour, 2, 3, 4. The cold was seeping into my bones, dulling my limbs, but my mind was hyper-alert, screaming. My eyes strained into the nothingness, trying to discern a shape, a shadow, anything. But there was nothing but the inky blackness and the shallow, grating breath. Every cell in my body screamed at me to move, to strike, to do something. But my years of sheer, bloody-minded survival had taught me patience, and the knowledge that some horrors were best met with stillness. As the first faint blush of red began to bleed into the eastern sky, announcing the coming sunrise, the waiting ended. The world was still obscured by a thick, oppressive gloom, but the light was coming, and with it, the creature. It emerged from behind the tent, not from the gaping rip, but from the shadows of the trees beyond. It didn't walk, it sprang, a terrifying, impossible leap over the tent, landing with a sickening thud directly in front of us, facing the now torn opening. It stood on 2 legs, impossibly tall, skeletal, 9 feet, maybe more, silhouetted against the nascent, blood-red sky. Its body was a collection of sharp angles and protrusions, like a nightmare made of barbed wire and famine. Its back bristled with needle-sharp spines that seemed to catch the barest hint of light. And its face, the cashier hadn't been exaggerating. 2 oval shapes, dark and empty, crossed horizontally, were its eyes. A single vertical slit, serrated with countless needle-sharp teeth, formed its mouth. A malevolent, knowing grin seemed to stretch across its entire visage, a mockery of a human smile. It was the ghoul hound, and it looked hungry. A new, primal fear, cold and sharp, lanced through me, but beneath it, a familiar surge of adrenaline, and a deep, self-loathing sense of inevitability. This was it. This was where the road ended. Not with a whimper, but a grotesque snarl. Frank, beside me, let out a choked gasp, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He was frozen, utterly useless. And in that moment, my damn conscience, that irritating, self-destructive flicker of responsibility, took over. I wasn't going to be a statistic, and I wasn't going to let Frank be one either. I moved. No thought, just instinct. I wasn't a large man, skinny build, cross-country runner in high school. Never been good at confrontation. But something snapped. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of the situation. Maybe it was the decades of being hunted, of running, finally boiling over. Or maybe it was just that desperate, animalistic need to survive, to do something, when inaction meant certain death. I shot forward, my worn boots crunching on the frozen snow, a desperate, pathetic charge against a 9-foot nightmare. My bear spray was still clutched in my hand. I aimed for its face, for those black, empty eye ovals. I launched myself low, hoping to tackle it, to knock it off balance, to buy us a fraction of a second. The impact was like hitting a brick wall made of sticks and razor blades. A shocking jolt of pain shot up my arm, but somehow, impossibly, I managed to knock it back, a half stumble, a flailing tangle of stick limbs. It recovered with unnatural speed, rising back to its full, terrifying height. The cross-shaped face, a grotesque mask of malice, was now twisted into a wide, menacing smirk, a silent laugh at my futile attack. I could feel the cold blast of the bear's spray from my hand, a thick, orange cloud, striking its eyes. It swiped at them with a long, thin claw, wiping away the chemical irritant as if it were a minor annoyance. The smell of the spray mingled with the rotten tang of the creature, a truly unholy combination. Then, a massive, skeletal hand, all sharp angles and protruding bones, moved with lightning speed. It struck me across the face, a flat, concussive blow that felt less like a punch and more like being hit by a frozen oak branch. Pain exploded behind my eyes, a white-hot flash, and the world tilted precariously. I heard Frank scream, a raw, terrified sound. My knees buckled. I tasted blood. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the ghoulhound's sneering face, looming over me, a silent promise of oblivion. I woke to the jarring sensation of being dragged, face down, through the frozen underbrush. The world was a kaleidoscope of pain and muffled sounds. My head throbbed, a drum solo of agony. My wrists were still bound, but now my ankles were too, rope biting into flesh. The cold, that familiar, oppressive cold, had seeped into my bones. Above me, the sickeningly rhythmic thud-thud of multiple, impossibly thin legs on snow. I blinked, trying to clear the haze. We weren't alone. A whole group of them, at least 3, maybe 4, ghoulhounds, assisting the one we had just fought, dragging us deeper into the woods, into the maw of the Catskills. They were talking, a low, raspy, chittering sound that vibrated with malevolent glee. This was it. Then, breakfast. My mind, despite the pain and the terror, began to churn, cold and calculating. Survive. Always survive. I felt a sharp, insistent jab in my right hip, my Swiss Army knife. My heart gave a frantic thump. It was still there, in the inner pocket of my jeans, forgotten in the chaos. A tiny, improbable spark of hope. The ropes were tight, but not impossibly so. And I was skinny. I shifted, a slow, almost imperceptible movement, trying to make it look like the natural slump of an unconscious body. My fingers, numb and clumsy, worked their way down, inch by agonizing inch, until they brushed against the rough fabric of my jeans. Then the smooth, cold metal of the knife. Getting it out was the hard part. I twisted my torso, straining against the ropes, gritting my teeth against the fire in my shoulders. A grunt from one of the ghoul hounds, a low, questioning growl. I froze, holding my breath, my muscles locked. The dragging continued. They hadn't noticed. Slowly, carefully, I worked the knife free, the tiny, almost useless blade for cutting thread. It would have to do. I brought my bound wrists up, twisting and turning, until the rope was pressed against the blade. It was awkward, impossible, but I persisted, sawed with desperate, silent movements. The rope was tough, frozen, but eventually a single strand gave way. Then another. The work was excruciatingly slow. Each cut a monumental effort. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I could hear Frank's shallow, ragged breathing beside me. The sound a constant reminder that I wasn't just doing this for myself. My damned conscience, always there, even at the precipice of consumption. Finally, with a soft, almost inaudible snap, the last strand of rope around my wrists frayed and broke. Freedom, a small, miraculous freedom, miraculous. I flexed my fingers, blood rushing back, a painful pins and needles sensation. Now the ankles. This was easier. I cut one, then the other, the rough strands falling away like dead snakes. My legs were free. My right arm was free. My left arm was still pinned by my body. I pushed myself up, slowly, quietly. The ghoul hounds, oblivious, continued dragging us. My eyes scanned the immediate surroundings, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. And then I saw it, a pile, not a natural pile of logs or rocks. This was organized, a grotesque tableau of horror. At least 25 bodies, disassembled with that same eerie precision, limbs and torsos, skulls and rib cages, separated and then meticulously reassembled into a macabre puzzle, a leg here, an arm there, pieced together like morbid artwork. The smell, sharp and metallic, rose from the pile, confirming what my eyes already knew. This wasn't just a hunting ground, it was a charnel house, a workshop of the grotesque. The disappearances the cashier had spoken of. This was their final destination. My stomach churned, a cold, bitter bile rising in my throat. This wasn't some random animal attack. This was something with intent, with a terrifying, perverse artistry. As I took in the horrifying sight, one of the ghoul hounds, the largest one, the one that had smacked me unconscious, stopped, its head tilted, those awful cross-shaped eyes fixing on me. Then, one by one, the others stopped too, their chittering silence. All of them turned, those black oval eyes boring into me, into Frank, who was now stirring beside me, groaning faintly. And then they spoke, a chorus of raspy, deep voices, like rocks grinding together, or 1,000 desiccated leaves skittering across frozen ground. A sound that tore at the fabric of the morning quiet, chilling me to the very marrow of my bones. They spoke in perfect, horrifying unison, their voices resonating with an ancient, alien intelligence. These two have managed to wake and free themselves. The words hung in the air, a declaration, a judgment. My mind reeled. They were speaking English, perfectly, with a strange, unnerving cadence. They have earned their freedom. As they spoke, their long, skeletal hands, all sharp angles and protruding bones, lifted, waving in a strange, complex gesture. A cold wave of energy washed over me, a force that was less physical and more existential. It pressed in, stealing the air from my lungs, the strength from my limbs, the very thought from my mind. I felt Frank's body go limp beside me, his groan cut short. The blackness, which had only just retreated, surged back, faster, stronger, pulling me down, down, down. My last thought was of that pile of broken bodies and the chilling respect in their voices. They weren't just predators, they were judges. When I opened my eyes again, the world was no longer a blur of pain and panic. The sun was high, a weak, pale disk in a sky of washed-out blue. My head still throbbed, a dull ache now, but the crushing weight was gone. I was lying on the ground, still cold, but the sharp bite of winter was less intense. My body felt heavy, oddly clean. I touched my wrists. The rope burns were there, red and raw, but the ropes themselves were gone. Frank was beside me, stirring, groaning, his eyes fluttering open. We were back, right by my crappy sedan. Our campsite, which had been a scene of meticulous chaos, was now perfectly packed. The tent was neatly folded, the sleeping bags rolled tight, every piece of gear stowed away precisely as we had packed it before we'd started the trip. My keys were already in the ignition. The engine was running, a low, comforting hum against the vast, oppressive silence. The fuel tank, which I distinctly remembered being half empty, was full. This was wrong. All of it. Too clean. Too perfect. As if the last 12 hours had been a dream, a shared nightmare. But the raw rope burns on my wrists, the lingering taste of fear in my mouth, the echo of those grating voices, they were all too real. What happened? Frank mumbled, pushing himself up, staring around in bewildered disbelief. They let us go, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. My hand went to my watch. 1 in the afternoon. We'd been out for hours. I didn't waste another second. I stumbled into the driver's seat, Frank scrambling into the passenger side, still dazed. I slammed the door shut, the sound shockingly loud in the quiet. My foot hit the accelerator, hard. The old sedan lurched forward, tires spitting snow, tearing out of that valley like a bat out of hell. I drove faster than that car had any right to go, ignoring the speed limit, ignoring the curves, just focused on putting as much distance as possible between us and that place. The mountains, which had been so deceptively beautiful, now loomed like watchful, silent giants, their peaks dusted with the promise of more horrors. We didn't speak for the entire 2-hour drive out of the Catskills, past the forgotten hamlets, past the gas station with the worried cashier, back to the relative sanity of the foothills. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the trees at the side of the road, a flash of something impossibly thin and tall, keeping pace with us. Frank would let out a small, terrified gasp beside me. They were watching. They were always watching. I dropped Frank off at his parents' house, muttering some hurried excuse about food poisoning. He looked shell-shocked, a ghost of his former optimistic self. He wouldn't be going camping again anytime soon. I drove straight to my own parents' house, a place I rarely visited, a sanctuary that felt increasingly fragile. My mother, bless her oblivious heart, greeted me with concern, asking why I was home early. I repeated the food poisoning lie, the words tasting like metal. They wouldn't believe the truth. No one ever did. My family, or what little was left of it, had always been good at ignoring the inconvenient realities. And my own past, the one that had forced me to live this transient, haunted life, was buried deep beneath layers of unspoken grief and selective memory. That night, in the deceptive safety of my childhood bedroom, the tapping started. Soft, insistent, rhythmic, on the window. Tap, tap, tap. Not a branch, not rain. It was too precise, too deliberate. I pulled the blinds tight, but the sound persisted, a constant, chilling reminder that I was not free, that they knew exactly where I was. I woke in the late morning, dragged from a fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep by the piercing, raw screams of my parents. I scrambled out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, already knowing what I would see. The ghoul hound. It was there, outside my bedroom window, its cross-shaped face pressed against the glass, Those empty oval eyes staring directly at me. A silent, knowing stare that spoke of judgment and a terrifying, perverse respect. I write this now, the pen feeling heavy in my hand, the knowledge of their proximity a cold weight in my chest. I've tried everything. Ghost hunters, charlatans, even a desperate, bewildered exorcist who just shook his head and mumbled about residual energy and collective hysteria. Nothing works. They're always there, just beyond the periphery, just outside the window, just at the edge of the tree line. They don't attack, not directly, not anymore. Not since they granted us our freedom. I can't tell if their presence is sinister or merely watchful. But I saw what they did to the ones who didn't wake up, to the ones who didn't earn their release. That pile of precisely arranged bones. This is my warning. Listen to your gut. Trust the cliché gas station cashier. Don't go camping anywhere in the Catskills unless you're at a resort, surrounded by bright lights and the comforting, if false, illusion of human safety. And if you choose to disregard this, if you choose to chase that elusive sense of peace or awe in those ancient, watching mountains, well, come prepared, because the Catskills have eyes, and they have teeth, and they have their own brand of respect for those who survive their games. It's not a kindness, it's a curse. The stench of pine and damp earth clung to me, thick and cloying, but beneath it, something else. A raw, metallic tang that tasted like fear and old blood. My breath hitched, a ragged tear trying to escape, but I clamped my hand over my mouth, pressing my knuckles into my teeth until the pain was a dull ache. Outside, just inches from the flimsy screen of leaves I'd pulled around myself, I heard it. A low, wet sniff, followed by the sickening drag of something impossibly heavy across the forest floor. It was close. Too close. My heart, a panicked drum against my ribs, threatened to burst through the fabric of my worn leather jacket. Every muscle in my body screamed, demanding flight, but my limbs were locked, frozen in a rictus of sheer, unadulterated terror. The whispers, ancient and malevolent, slithered into my mind, crawling under my skin like cold worms, promising a fate far worse than death. That was where I ended up, lost and alone in the Mauve Glacier. But it hadn't started that way. No, it always began with a choice, a flicker of that cursed conscience, pulling me deeper into the dark, one reluctant step at a time. I'd been driving for what felt like an eternity, the kind of eternity measured in lukewarm coffee and the blurred lines of highways stretching into the horizon. My latest gig, hauling a nondescript load of something across state lines, had finally coughed me out near the western edge of Montana. Glacier National Park loomed in the distance, a colossal, jagged silhouette against the bruised purple of an impending dusk. Most folks saw beauty. I saw a colossal, geological mausoleum, ready to swallow whatever wandered too close. My analog wristwatch, a familiar weight on my wrist, showed it was past 5. Time for a break, maybe a cheap diner meal, before finding some godforsaken motel to crash in. The open road was my only true home these days, a constantly shifting boundary that kept the past and whatever liked to stick to me like burrs at bay. It usually worked, for a while. A small, rustic ranger station materialized out of the twilight, a single incandescent bulb casting a sickly yellow glow onto a weathered wooden sign. My stomach rumbled a protest. Maybe they had snacks. I pulled the rig into the small parking lot, the diesel engine idling with a rumble that vibrated through the worn leather of my jacket. Inside, on a kid barely out of high school, looking far too clean and earnest for this part of the world, was leaning on the counter. He saw me come in, his gaze flickering over my weary face and the grime on my boots, settling for a beat too long on the faint tremor in my left hand as I pushed it into my pocket. He probably thought I was just another tired trucker. He wouldn't have been wrong, not entirely. You wouldn't happen to have any recommendations for things to do, would you? A voice as smooth as a river-worn stone cut through the quiet. I hadn't noticed him before. He was a few feet from me, a lean man with a shock of sandy hair and a smile that seemed to radiate genuine warmth. Stan. He'd introduced himself, said he was just passing through, looking for some solitude. Same as me. A lie, probably. Everyone out here had an agenda, even if it was just running from themselves. I knew the type. Hell, I was the type. The Ranger. His eyes still holding a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Cleared his throat. Plenty of great trails around here, he replied, his tone carrying a peculiar weight, as if each word was wrapped in lead. But stick to the marked ones. Some places aren't welcoming. He paused and then added, almost as an afterthought, especially after dark, things get quiet. Stan chuckled, a pleasant sound that seemed out of place in the ranger station's hushed interior. Right. Thanks for the tip, kid. I didn't chuckle. I just watched the ranger. He wasn't just talking about bears. I knew that chill. It was the same one that had followed me out of a certain snow-choked mountain pass not so long ago. A cold whisper on the wind that promised unnatural things. It was the same one that had curled up under my skin the first time I saw a set of eyes that weren't quite human staring out from a too-perfect face. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there, a permanent resident. My hand went to my wristwatch, thumbing the crown, a nervous habit, an old habit. Outside, the air was already biting, the first stars pricking holes in the deepening gloom. Stan, ever the conversationalist, started chatting about his plans to hike a particular trail known for its ancient growth. My initial thought was to nod, offer a polite grunt, and get back to my rig, drive away. That was always the smart move. But then he mentioned his dog, a scruffy terrier mix he'd found on the road. Same as me and Buster, a flicker of something. Maybe empathy, maybe just a momentary lapse in judgment. Caught me. I told him I was looking for somewhere secluded to pull off for the night, maybe dry camp a bit before my next pickup. He suggested a spot he knew, a little-used trail access point, just off the main road but deep enough that you wouldn't get bothered. My internal monologue, a cynical Greek chorus, screamed no, but the words that came out were, lead the way. My damn reluctant conscience. It always bit me in the ass. The first 2 days were almost pleasant. Too pleasant, the kind of clear, still days that screamed lull before the storm to someone like me. Stan, it turned out, was a surprisingly good campmate, efficient and quiet. He moved with an easy grace, his dog, a nervous little thing named Penelope, sticking close to his heels. I'd set up my small tent, the go bag zipped up and ready by the entrance. Just in case, old habits die hard, especially when the things you're running from don't. We hiked a bit, cooked over a small fire, and watched the vast, unfeeling beauty of the park unfold around us. But even then, the small things began. At night, the shadows seemed to thicken into something more than just an absence of light. Shapes flickered at the edges of the firelight, just beyond the reach of the flame, too indistinct to be anything, but too persistent to be nothing. Penelope, usually calm, would suddenly growl a low, guttural sound, her hackles raised, staring into the impenetrable darkness beyond our small circle of warmth. A wind would pick up, cold and cutting, even for July. It whispered through the ancient trees, not like natural wind, but like something trying to speak, something hungry. I brought it up once, casually, trying to gauge Stan's reaction. You hear that? I asked, gesturing vaguely into the darkness after a particularly icy gust. He glanced at me, his eyes surprisingly flat in the firelight. Michelle, he'd said, using a name that was not mine, but the name he'd been calling me for 2 days, a quirk I'd ignored. Don't let your imagination run wild. It's just the woods. He was probably testing me, seeing if I was the type who spooked easy. I just grunted, turned my back, and tried to ignore the fact that the woods felt less like woods and more like the inside of a vast, breathing lung. The silence at night was oppressive, heavy and still, pressing down on the tent fabric, muffling my own breathing until it felt like I was suffocating. The towering trees, ancient and black, felt less like protectors and more like prison walls, keeping something in, or maybe keeping us trapped. And then there were the whispers. I'd wake in the dead of night, heart hammering against my ribs, cold sweat plastering my hair to my forehead, to sounds that seemed to come from all around us. Faint, indistinct, like 1,000 dry leaves rustling, but persistent. A language I didn't know, but somehow understood was not meant for human ears. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Stan after one particularly vivid night, the chill of it still clinging to me. He groaned, rolling over. "Hear what?" His voice was thick with sleep, laced with an irritation that felt almost rehearsed. "The whispers," I replied, my voice barely a thread. He sighed, a dramatic exhalation, and buried his face deeper into his sleeping bag. "Leo," he mumbled, getting my name wrong again. "Get some sleep. You're hearing things." Maybe I was, or maybe he was just better at pretending he wasn't. I usually was. The turning point came on the fourth night, a night that began like any other but ended in a primal dread that clawed at my throat and threatened to tear my sanity to ribbons. The sun, a blood-orange disk, dipped below the jagged peaks earlier than we had anticipated, its golden hues bleeding into deep purples and blacks that swallowed the forest whole. We were hiking back from a short loop, just stretching our legs before making dinner. The faint crunch of our footsteps on pine needles was the only sound between us, a fragile shield against the growing silence. I reached into the small day pack Stan was carrying, the one he'd insisted on taking despite my offer to carry it, for the trail map. My hand came up empty. I tried again, digging deeper, but there was nothing. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "You lost the map?" My voice was sharper than I intended, cutting through the growing darkness. A bad sign. I never raised my voice. "I didn't lose it," he snapped back, irritation flaring in his eyes. "I saw you pack it. You had it last. I put it in your bag, Stan, right after you looked at it. Don't try to play me." The accusation hung in the air, thick and unwelcome. My heart hammered, not just from the fear of being lost, but from the sudden, sharp realization that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. He never let me carry the bag, and he was lying. I could smell it. "Well, and it's not here now," he growled, his eyes darting around the deepening forest, a frantic, almost animalistic look in them. His frustration mirrored my own, but there was something else in his tone, something brittle, something edging on pure, unadulterated fear, or something else, something calculating. We tried retracing our steps, but the trail felt wrong, warped, as though the very geometry of the forest had shifted in the encroaching shadows. Familiar landmarks seemed twisted or missing altogether. A large, distinctive pine, a fallen log I'd noted, a cluster of unique rocks. Each step felt heavier, the air thicker, charged with an electric unease that prickled on my skin. The tree trunks loomed, black giants pressing in from all sides, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the last vestiges of light. And then we heard it, a crackling of underbrush, deliberate and steady, began behind us. Not a deer. Deer moved with a certain nervous grace, a rustle and a snap. This was heavier, more purposeful. Stan froze mid-step, his head snapping toward the sound, his face pale in the faint light. "It's probably just a deer," he muttered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The sound didn't match a deer. It slithered, a wet, scraping noise that crawled beneath my skin, conjuring images of something vast and boneless dragging itself across the earth. Something reptilian, but impossibly large. Penelope whined, a low, terrified sound, and pressed herself against Stan's leg, trembling violently. He ignored her, his eyes wide, fixed on the darkness. The whispers began anew, not distant this time. They felt close, too close, weaving through the trees in a language that sounded ancient and raw, like gravel grinding against bone. My pulse thundered in my ears, a frantic drum against the encroaching silence, and my breathing came in shallow, panicked gasps. "Stan," I whispered, clutching his arm, my nails digging into the tough fabric of his jacket. "We need to go. Now." "We stay calm," he said, but his words rang hollow, thin as glass. His eyes darted around, scanning the inky blackness as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It felt like they were coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, each syllable dripping with malice, a promise of unspeakable horrors. They scraped at the edges of my sanity, 1,000 tiny voices trying to worm their way into my brain, to strip away my will, to make me stand still and wait. Then, the sound shifted. A low hiss pierced the air, chilling and deliberate, long and drawn out, followed by a heavy thud in the distance. Closer this time. Whatever it was moving with purpose, and it was hunting us. Stan made the call to run, his decision sudden and without a word. He grabbed my hand, his grip crushing, and pulled me along, almost dragging me. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I struggled to match his frantic pace, my feet stumbling over roots and rocks I couldn't see. The slithering sounds quickened, matching our frantic movements, a relentless pursuit. My legs burned, each step a desperate push against the mounting terror. My heart pounded in my chest, a desperate drum loud enough to drown out the whispers, or so I hoped. Penelope, forgotten, barked once, a sharp, terrified yelp, before her cries were cut short, a sickening wet snap, followed by a final gurgling gasp. Stan didn't even flinch. He just pulled harder. That's when I knew what he was or what he served. Knew this wasn't just a bad situation, it was a trap. My ankle twisted with a sickening crunch beneath me, a white-hot spear of pain shooting up my leg. I screamed. The sound ripped from my throat, a desperate, raw cry. "Stan! Wait!" I cried, tears streaming down my face as fear seized my body, paralyzing me. I fell, my hands scrambling for purchase on the slick, cold earth. But he didn't stop. He didn't even slow. His figure, a dark silhouette against the barely perceptible gloom, simply dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone with the oppressive darkness closing in, the whispers rising to a crescendo. He hadn't just run. He had abandoned me. He had used me as bait. The whispers surrounded me now, no longer faint or distant. They were everywhere, tangible, pressing against my skin like an icy wind, crawling into my ears, into my very mind. Words I couldn't understand filled the air, layered with menace, promises of a slow, agonizing end. My shaking hands groped for my phone, clutching it like a lifeline, my fingers fumbling with the screen. "No signal," it read. Of course, there never was when you truly needed one. I scrambled, adrenaline dulling the pain in my ankle, pulling myself beneath a thick tangle of roots from an ancient, fallen tree. It was a pathetic hiding spot, but it was all I had. I pulled a few damp leaves and loose soil over myself, trying to disappear, to become part of the forest floor. The stench of decay intensified, thick and sickening, as if the air itself was putrefying. Something heavy moved past me, each deliberate step making the ground tremble, vibrating through the earth and up into my bones. My breath hitched as a low hiss, long and deliberate, filled the air, the sound like 1,000 tiny needles scraping across a blackboard. Whatever it was close, too close, its presence suffocating, pressing down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. I clamped my hands over my mouth, pressing hard, stifling a sob, biting back a scream as tears blurred my vision. I could feel its gaze, a terrible, unblinking awareness. Even though I dared not look, it was a pressure, a psychic weight that pinned me down, demanding I reveal myself. My body trembled uncontrollably, every muscle frozen in a rictus of terror. I could feel the vibrations of its movements, the shift of air as it moved. It was sniffing, just inches away, sniffing the ground, the leaves. Me, seconds stretched into an eternity, each one a lifetime of pure, unadulterated horror. Before it finally moved on, the slithering sound receding slowly, deliberately, into the profound and terrifying silence of the pre-dawn forest. Morning brought rescue, or something like it. Rangers, their voices like beacons piercing the hazy aftermath of my terror, stumbled upon me by sheer chance. They almost walked past. I lay there, shivering, caked in mud and fear, my ankle a throbbing mess of agony. When I tried to tell them about Stan, about the whispers, about the creature, my words came in frantic bursts, each syllable laced with desperation, nonsensical. They listened with the kind of polite or dismissive patience you offer to someone who's clearly in shock, clearly unhinged. They promised a search party for Stan. I waited at the ranger station, my teeth chattering, my body still convulsing with residual tremors. Hours later, they found his pack, bloodied, torn, but no Stan. No tracks leading away, just the ravaged remains of what had once contained his things. The whispers had stopped, for now, but their memory lingered, a shadow that clung to me like a second skin. It wasn't over. It was never over. Weeks later, a blur of cheap motels and long, sleepless nights. I unpacked what little camping gear I still possessed from my duffel. At the very bottom of my bag, nestled amongst some discarded protein bar wrappers, was the map, pristine, folded neatly, as though it had never been lost, never been the catalyst for that night's nightmare. My hands shook as I held it, a cold, hard realization settling over me, solidifying into a terrible truth. It hadn't been lost. It had been placed there. He'd led me to that spot. He'd planned it, and then he'd used me, just like he'd used Penelope. I'll never go back to Glacier. I packed my go bag, checked my wristwatch, and pointed my rig west, towards the setting sun, towards anywhere but here. But sometimes, in the quiet, desperate moments of the night, when the diesel engine finally falls silent and the world goes still, I still hear the whispers. Not in my dreams anymore. They're just there, a faint, malevolent static at the edge of my hearing. A constant reminder that some places aren't welcoming, and some things never let you go, and that my cursed conscience keeps dragging me back into the jaws of the dark. Character count 9940. The pipe thudded again, a wet, sickening squelch that didn't belong, not against bone, not against flesh. It was like striking a sack of wet rags, or a child's forgotten plushie, but this plushie was writhing, a grotesque parody of life. My knuckles screamed in protest against the vibrations, the metal cool and unyielding in my grip, slick with something I refused to acknowledge. He was under me, a lump of cotton and dread, the ragged pink ears splayed on the damp grass like broken wings. I struck again, and again, the animalistic grunts tearing from my throat echoing in the pre-dawn silence. Each blow meant to pulverize, to erase, to make this waking nightmare stop. But it wasn't stopping. It was giving way, yielding, dissolving beneath the force of my desperate assault, and a primal terror, colder than the morning air, seized me, because things weren't supposed to break like this. That night, I would come to understand that some nightmares don't just lurk in the shadows. They wear ridiculous costumes and stalk the quiet streets of suburbia, waiting for an invitation. And I, the reluctant gatekeeper of my own sanity, was about to be dragged into their twisted game. A game that had begun, like so many others, with a simple, unsettling observation under a deceptively clear sky. I'd taken a temporary gig, a night watchman shift at some corporate park on the outskirts of what looked like the kind of postcard suburb that makes you want to throw up. Pristine lawns, two-car garages, kids' bikes left out, probably a golden retriever or two per block. You know the type. Every house a perfect replica of the last, painted in muted, inoffensive colors. It was unsettling, the sheer homogeneity of it all. It felt like a stage set, too quiet, too perfect, like a carefully constructed diorama just waiting for a monster to claw its way out of the meticulously mown lawn. I preferred the grime and noise of the city, the chaos that felt, ironically, more honest. But a job was a job, and the pay was enough to keep Buster in kibble and me in cheap coffee for another month. My shifts usually ended around 6 in the morning, just as the sun was thinking about creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in colors too optimistic for my cynical soul. Most mornings, I'd grab a lukewarm coffee from a gas station on the way to the pathetic little motel room I was renting, a haven of stale cigarette smoke and questionable stains. But about a week ago, I found myself with a rare hour to kill. Traffic was light, the air was still cool, and a gnawing restlessness had taken root in my gut. So, instead of going straight back to my temporary cage, I decided to drive through the picture-perfect streets I'd been guarding, just to see what the daylight brought to this manufactured slice of Americana. I was cruising down Maple Street, or Elm, or whatever saccharine name they'd slapped on it, when I saw it, parked across the street from a particularly ostentatious McMansion. In the driveway of its slightly less ostentatious neighbor stood a figure, tall, too tall, maybe, and wide, and undeniably, unmistakably, dressed in a goddamn bunny costume. My foot instinctively eased off the gas. My old wristwatch, a comforting weight on my wrist, felt suddenly heavy, though I didn't check the time. It was a nervous tick, a constant anchor in a world that often spun out of control. I slowed the pickup truck to a crawl. My eyes narrowed. The costume was bad, not cute mascot. Bad, but pulled out of a dumpster behind a haunted carnival bad. Tattered, dingy white fur, mottled with what might have been pink, or maybe just ancient grime. One of the long, floppy ears was torn, hanging precariously, giving the whole ensemble a lopsided, deranged look. The head was tipped back, staring up at the second-story window of the house across the street. Not moving, not even a twitch, just staring. "Well, ain't that just precious?" I muttered to myself, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My first thought was prank, because what else could it be? Some bored teenager or a disgruntled ex-employee from a local theme park. People did stupid things for kicks, but the stillness, that was what snagged on my already frayed nerves. Normal people, even pranksters, shift their weight, fidget, check their phones. This thing was a statue, carved from cheap polyester and malevolence. It was the kind of stillness that screamed wrong. My gut tightened, the familiar cold dread beginning its slow, insidious climb. I'd seen this kind of wrongness before, the subtle misalignments that heralded genuine horror. A shiver ran down my spine, the kind that had become an unwelcome old friend over the years. This was the kind of thing that reminded me of that house, the one I didn't remember, the one that still sent phantom chills through my bones, the one I'd been running from my entire adult life. A few minutes later, a guy burst out of the McMansion across the street, wielding what looked suspiciously like a majorette baton. He was shouting something, his face a mask of furious indignation. The bunny, still silent, still unnerving, simply turned and shambled away with surprising speed, vanishing behind a hedge before the guy could get within striking distance. The man, puffing, stood there for a moment, then went back inside, grumbling. Idiots, I thought, my foot pressing the gas. Always confronting the crazy ones. Better to just drive away. Easier for everyone. But a part of me, the part I hated, the part that always dragged me into trouble, felt a flicker of something close to concern for the residents of this cul-de-sac. They clearly had no idea what they were dealing with. They were dismissing it as a harmless freak, a one-time thing. My personal history screamed that one-time things were usually just the opening act. I knew that feeling, the false sense of security after a first encounter. It never lasted. My world weariness wasn't just cynicism, it was a scar tissue built from countless encounters with things that didn't play by the rules. A couple of nights later, I was back on patrol, doing my usual rounds of the corporate park's perimeter. The air was thick and humid, clinging to my skin like a second layer. My worn leather jacket, a constant companion, felt like a burden tonight, but I never took it off. It was more than just clothing. It was a shield, a tangible piece of my past that had somehow survived everything with me. The moon, a bloated orange orb, hung low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every rustle of the leaves. I checked my wristwatch again, the glass cool beneath my thumb. 02:17 a.m. Prime time for things to go sideways. Suddenly, a cacophony erupted from one of the residential streets bordering the park. A dog, not just barking, but a frantic, unhinged yapping, escalating into a fever pitch of guttural growls and desperate whines. It was the sound of pure terror, mingled with aggressive territoriality, the kind of sound that cuts through the manufactured silence of suburbia like a rusty knife. My hand immediately went to the heavy mag light clipped to my belt, my go bag already mentally inventoried in the back of my truck. Every instinct screamed at me to keep walking, to ignore it, to let the locals deal with their own domestic disturbances. My job was security for the park, not a neighborhood watch, but that damned reluctant conscience, a splintered shard of responsibility I'd never managed to excise, started to prick. What if it wasn't just a stray? What if it was that thing? I veered off my usual route, my boots crunching on the gravel path that led to a gap in the hedge. Through the leafy screen, I could see into a backyard. A small, yapping dog, a cocker spaniel by the looks of it, was throwing itself against a chain-link fence, a ball of fluffy, furious rage. And on the other side of that fence, standing as still as a tombstone, was the bunny. My breath hitched. The air around him felt heavy, wrong, like static before a lightning strike. He wasn't doing anything, just staring down at the dog, his head slightly tilted, the torn ear drooping grotesquely. The sheer, unmoving presence of him was more terrifying than any overt threat. It was predatory, patient, like a spider waiting for a fly to exhaust itself in the web. I pressed myself against the hedge, watching, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my own rising fear. This wasn't a prank anymore. Not with that dog's raw terror, not with the way that tattered costume seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. A window on the second floor of the house flew open with a bang. A woman's furious shout ripped through the night. "What the folk do you think you're doing? Get your ass the hell away from my house or I'll rip it." Her voice, shrill with a combination of fear and righteous anger, was surprisingly effective. The bunny's head snapped up, turning towards her, a dark void where its face should have been. Then, without a sound, it turned and began to walk away, slowly, deliberately, not running, not hurrying, just walking into the deeper shadows of the street, vanishing as if it had never been there. I waited until the woman slammed her window shut, the dog's barking slowly subsiding into whimpers. My jaw was clenched so tight my teeth ached. What was it? Why here? And why was I always the one who stumbled into this crap? My mind flashed to things I'd seen, things I'd fought, things that had left me with scars both visible and invisible. This felt different, yet horribly familiar. The unsettling stillness, the unnaturalness of its movement, the quiet dread it left in its wake. It was a signature, almost a calling card of the things that clung to the fringes of reality, drawn perhaps to the very cracks in my cursed existence, always attracting the next nightmare. In the following days, the suburb shed its perfect facade. I noticed subtle changes. More curtains drawn, fewer kids playing outside. People hurried inside, not lingering on their porches. What had once been a uniform blankness now held a collective tremor of unease, a low hum of paranoia. They were locking their doors more often. Took them long enough. I saw one guy, the majorette baton wielder, pacing his yard, an old baseball bat slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the quiet street like a hawk. He looked jumpy. Good. Maybe they'd finally get a taste of what the real world was like. A small, grim part of me felt a twisted satisfaction at their discomfort, a validation of my own lived horror. This wasn't some isolated incident in a dusty, forgotten corner of the map. This was here, in their picture-perfect lives, and they were finally starting to get it. My own vigilance, already honed to a razor's edge from years on the run, ratcheted up even further. My movements at the corporate park became more precise, my observations more detailed. I checked the perimeter fence lines twice, 3 times. The motel room, usually just a place to crash, became a temporary fortress. My go bag was always by the door, passport tucked deep inside, a roll of cash tucked into a hidden pocket. The heavy pipe I kept under my bed, a remnant from a previous, thankfully brief, construction job, was always within reach. It was a simple, brutal tool, but sometimes simple and brutal was all you had. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, over and over again. The waiting was the worst part. A couple of days bled into a week. Nothing. No bunny. The false sense of calm that settled over the neighborhood was more unnerving than the initial sightings. It was the calm before the storm, the held breath before the plunge. My gut told me it wasn't over. My gut was never wrong about these things. It came on a Friday night, just after 2 a.m. I was in my motel room, trying to force myself to sleep. The air conditioning unit was rattling like a dying beast, but it couldn't drown out the persistent hum of my own anxieties. I had my eyes closed, lying perfectly still, trying to empty my mind, but it was a losing battle. My old analog wristwatch, forgotten on the bedside table, seemed to tick louder than usual. Each second, a slow, deliberate march towards something inevitable. And then I heard it, a faint shink. It wasn't loud, not the shattering crash you'd expect from glass breaking. It was almost delicate, like a carefully placed icicle tapping against a window pane or a pebble skipping across a frozen pond. Too quiet. That was the first red flag. Nothing that happens when something bad is happening is ever quiet. It's loud, messy, violent. This was precise, surgical. My eyes snapped open. I was instantly awake, every nerve ending screaming. I didn't move, just lay there, breath held, straining to hear. The rattling AC, the distant drone of a semi on the highway, the thrum of my own panicked heartbeat. Nothing else, for what felt like an eternity. There was nothing. The silence was a physical presence, pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. My mind raced, cataloging possibilities, discarding them. Had I imagined it? My senses were always on edge, often playing tricks on me. Hallucinations were an old friend, born of sleep deprivation and chronic terror. But this felt real, bone-deep real. My gaze flickered to the door. I'd left it ajar, a habit from years of never quite trusting my surroundings, always wanting to know if something was approaching. Just a crack, barely an inch, but enough for a sliver of darkness to leak through. And through that sliver, I saw it, an eye. or what passed for an eye. A dark, bottomless pit, utterly devoid of light or reflection, framed by the matted, pink-tinged fur of that damn bunny costume. The tattered ears, unmistakable even in the dimness of the hallway, stood like broken antennae above a head that was tilted, watching me. My heart didn't just stop, it plummeted. The air was sucked out of my lungs in a silent gasp. For a split second, I was paralyzed, locked in its gaze, a rabbit in headlights, which was a bitter irony given the circumstances. It wasn't moving, just there, peering, waiting, and then a cold fury, a familiar surge of adrenaline, ripped through the paralysis. This wasn't just a random threat, it was a violation. It had found me. It had followed me. No, not again. Not here. Not now. I didn't even register the movement. 1 second I was staring, frozen in the bed. The next I was on my feet, pipe in hand. It was an instinct, raw and unthinking, born of countless moments of desperate survival. A guttural roar ripped from my throat, a sound I hadn't known I was capable of. A primal, animalistic scream of defiance and rage. I lunged for the door, the pipe a heavy, reassuring extension of my arm. The bunny thing vanished from the doorway with unnatural speed, a blur of pink and white. It didn't even bother to close the door behind it, which was a strange detail to cling to in that moment of sheer, unadulterated panic. But my mind, strangely detached, noted it anyway. It was making for the main door of the motel room, the flimsy lock a joke. My bare feet slapped against the cold linoleum floor as I launched myself into pursuit. He had a lead on me. This, whatever it was, a loping, unsettling gait as it burst through the motel room door and into the dimly lit corridor. I pounded after it, my breath already ragged. This wasn't a fight I wanted, but it was a fight I was suddenly in. And the rules were simple: survive or die trying. That damn conscience, my Achilles heel, always dragging me back into the inferno. Then, just as the bunny reached the exterior door of the motel, a furious bark erupted. It was a familiar sound, though slightly muffled by the walls. Chaucer, the dog from down the street. How the hell? The bunny suddenly stumbled, a jerky, awkward lurch, as if it had tripped over something unseen. It went down, sprawling onto its stomach with a dull thud. My chance. My only chance. I launched myself, a desperate, uncontrolled leap, landing on its back with both knees, ramming them down with all my weight. The air was knocked out of it, if it even breathed air, in a sickening rush. Then, without a second's hesitation, I brought the pipe down. Once, twice. A desperate, primal need to break it, to end it, to erase its very existence. The pipe hit, and it didn't feel right. It wasn't the bone-jarring impact of metal on flesh and bone. It was soft, mushy, like striking a sack of wet rags or a half-deflated punching bag. My knuckles protested against the vibrations, the metal cool and unyielding in my grip, slick with something I refused to acknowledge. He was under me, a lump of cotton and dread, the ragged pink ears splayed on the damp grass like broken wings. I struck again and again, the animalistic grunts tearing from my throat echoing in the pre-dawn silence. Each blow meant to pulverize, to erase, to make this waking nightmare stop. It was giving way, yielding, dissolving beneath the force of my desperate assault. My legs pressed into its back, felt its form collapsing, melting. The pipe sank deeper with each frantic strike. This wasn't a man. This wasn't flesh. My blood ran cold, colder than the morning air. A primal, instinctual terror, deeper than any fear of pain, seized me. Things weren't supposed to break like this. I scrambled back, stumbling to my feet, my mind reeling. The world swam for a moment, the edges of my vision blurring. And then, impossibly, the bunny thing lurched. It twisted, then slowly, agonizingly, began to push itself up. It shouldn't have been able to. Not after that. Not with that collapse of its form. Hell, it shouldn't have been able to get up after taking that many blows to the head from a heavy pipe, let alone after feeling like a bag of cotton. But it did, slowly, deliberately. It got to its feet. It moved with a strange, jointless fluidity, the tattered costume swaying. For a moment, it just stood there, swaying slightly, and I thought, absurdly, that it was going to come for me, that this was the moment I finally broke, or finally died. Then, with an abrupt, jerky movement, it turned and ran. It wasn't fast, not in a human way, but it was unnervingly efficient, a silent blur of white and pink. It shot out of the motel parking lot and into the street, vanishing into the pre-dawn gloom as if it had never been there. My body screamed for me to give chase, but my mind knew it was useless. It was gone, and I was left standing in the damp grass outside a cheap motel, pipe in hand, bare feet cold, shaking. The police came, of course. Called by some panicked guest who'd heard the commotion, I told them everything, or as much as I dared. The tattered bunny costume, the unsettling stillness, the break-in, the chase, the bizarre, unsettling sensation of hitting something that wasn't solid. They looked at me with a mixture of polite disbelief and thinly veiled pity. The young officer, fresh-faced and earnest, suggested perhaps the shock had played tricks on my senses. Maybe I had imagined the way it felt. The older, jaded one simply scribbled notes, his pen scratching against the paper like an angry beetle, occasionally glancing at my worn leather jacket and the general air of a man who'd seen too much. They couldn't find any trace of the bunny man. No footprints, no blood, nothing conclusive, just a broken window, consistent with a forced entry. They concluded it was likely a disturbed individual, a transient, and advised me to be more careful. Disturbed individual, I scoffed to myself later, watching the sun finally climb above the horizon, painting the sky in a harsh, unyielding white. They have no idea. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in that motel, just for a little while longer, finishing my security gig, watching the neighborhood from afar. The panic lingered. More houses put up "Beware of dog" signs. Others installed security cameras. The majorette baton guy now had a full-size baseball bat leaning against his porch. Good. They were finally learning. A little bit of the ugly truth had seeped into their carefully constructed bubble of normalcy. A small, chilling taste of the world I lived in. The world that relentlessly hunted me. I ended up finding Buster, that Cocker Spaniel. He wasn't a security system, just a nervous, jumpy little thing, abandoned by the panicked family who decided a dog that barked at the wrong things was a liability, not a guardian. His name was Chaucer, apparently. I renamed him Buster. He seemed to like that better. We understood each other. The little dog and me, two stray souls, perpetually wary, forever running from shadows that no one else could see. Maybe I hadn't taught that bunny thing a lesson, but it had certainly reminded me of one. The universe wasn't indifferent. It was actively hostile, a farm run by rapacious gods, and I was just another piece of livestock. Every time I thought I'd escaped the game, it just pulled me back in. I packed my go bag, checked my old analog wristwatch one last time, still ticking, a small mechanical certainty in a chaotic, uncertain world. I sketched the bunny thing in my notebook, its tattered ears and hollow eyes, trying to pin the nightmare to a page, to make sense of the nonsensical. It was a pathetic attempt at control, but it was all I had. Buster whined softly, nudging my hand. "All right, boy," I murmured, my voice raspy. "Time to go. Somewhere new, somewhere temporary, until it finds us again." Avery, because it always did. My past, That blank, terrifying void was a magnet, and every horror I encountered was just another link in the chain that tied me to it. This bunny thing, this unsettling, not quite solid horror, was just the newest addition to a growing collection of nightmares I carried, adding another layer to the trauma I was constantly trying and failing to outrun. Total characters, 9877. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of stale bookstore air and the scent of ozone, as the alien proboscis plunged into my neck. It wasn't the pain that seized me, though it was sharp, like a hot needle twisting beneath the skin, but the icy, impossible cold that spread from the puncture, a feeling utterly divorced from anything human. My vision blurred, colors bleeding at the edges, and then the cold gave way to a sickening warmth, a burning river coursing through my veins. Something foreign, something old, was being pumped into me, and with every pulsing throb, I felt my very essence, my stubborn, cynical self, begin to dissolve, to warp into something else. My knees buckled, the floor rushing up to meet me, but before the darkness took hold, I heard their ghoulish laughter, two voices merging into a single, derisive harmony, echoing in the cavern of my suddenly empty skull. That was the end of the day. But like most truly awful days in my life, it started somewhere much more mundane, somewhere utterly unremarkable. It started, as so many of my misfortunes seemed to, with a bad decision, a lingering sense of obligation, and a perfectly dreadful Valentine's Day morning. The diner was a grease-slicked monument to poor life choices and cholesterol, a flickering fluorescent tomb where the air hung heavy with the ghosts of burnt bacon and stale coffee. I was halfway through a breakfast bowl that tasted mostly of regret and institutional eggs, my face deliberately aimed at the chipped formica tabletop, trying to maintain some semblance of peace. My worn leather jacket, a second skin and a shield against the world, felt like a comforting weight on my shoulders. I was just another ghost in the machine, another anonymous face seeking a cheap meal before heading to whatever soul-numbing night shift I'd managed to scrounge up this week. Today, it was stacking boxes in a dimly lit warehouse, a job that promised solitude, if nothing else. But even a ghost can't escape the pervasive, nauseating saccharine sweetness of Valentine's Day. And these two, a couple, naturally, had decided the empty diner was the ideal stage for their nauseating performance of affection. They'd plopped themselves down at the table immediately to my left, close enough that I could practically feel the warmth radiating from their cloying display. I hated public affection, especially when it felt so theatrical. It was like they were auditioning for a rom-com, or perhaps a particularly disturbing reality show about people who enjoyed inflicting emotional pain on others. They giggled, they cooed, they made exaggerated gestures of devotion that scraped against my already frayed nerves like sandpaper. My internal monologue, usually a quiet hum of self-deprecation, began to chant, "Just eat your damn eggs. Vance, don't engage. Don't even look." But I'm a creature of habit, and unfortunately, one of those habits is my fatal flaw, a reluctant, deeply regrettable conscience that chafes against my cynical exterior. Despite my best efforts to ignore them, the cloying sweetness became too much, curdling into something almost acidic in my gut. I finally lifted my head, fixing them with what I hoped was a glare sharp enough to etch glass. A simple, silent plea for them to dial back the performative romance by, say, 99%. The woman caught my eye, and instead of shrinking, instead of offering an apologetic half-smile, she smiled back, a full, bright, utterly unbothered smile. The man, sensing her attention had drifted, turned his head slowly, like a predator assessing its prey, and offered a similar expression. My blood ran cold, not from anger, but from a sudden, prickling unease. Their smiles weren't just polite, they were too wide, too perfect, like mass stretched over something else. Beneath the surface, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something else, a flicker of Hostility? Something far more potent and unsettling than any irritation I'd shown. It was the kind of smile that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The kind of subtle wrongness that my survival instincts, honed by years of running from things that defied explanation, instantly flagged. It reminded me, with a sickening jolt, of Olivia, the skin carpet lady, or Ethan, the cannibal who'd worn a charming grin as he lured his victims. Another pretty facade, another potential trap. My hand instinctively went to my old, analog wristwatch, tracing the cool metal of the bezel. Not for the time, never for the time, just a small, grounding tick. Just then, salvation arrived in the form of a waitress with a fresh pot of coffee. I practically lunged for my mug, grateful for the interruption, the momentary reprieve from those unsettling gazes. When she left, the couple had resumed their obnoxious snogging, their heads bent together in a show of intimacy that now felt less romantic and more predatory. I was too tired, too world-weary to re-engage. My only goal was to finish my pathetic breakfast and escape this Valentine's Day purgatory. I wolfed down the rest of my eggs, the taste of cheap butter and artificial smoke, a welcome distraction from the mounting dread. As I made my way towards the counter to pay, navigating the grease-slicked floor with practiced ease, I overheard the woman's voice, cutting through the low hum of the exhaust fan. "Loners," she murmured, and the word hit me with the precision of a scalpel. There was no doubt she was talking about me. My feet, usually so eager to carry me away from trouble, froze. I turned, a fresh glare ready on my face, but she ignored me completely, her attention now fully on her partner. The man laughed, a low, guttural sound that seemed to rumble in his chest. Either at her comment or at my undeniably awkward posture. I wasn't going to do anything, just wanted them to know I'd heard, wanted to reclaim some sliver of dignity, but they just kept on, as if I were invisible, or perhaps beneath their notice. The waitress, bless her soul, must have caught the tail end of the interaction, or seen the dangerous tension in my shoulders. "Ready to pay, hun?" she called out, her voice a welcome siren song. I nodded, pulling my gaze away from the infuriating couple. I paid, throwing in a few extra bucks as a tip, a peace offering for the scene I'd almost, but not quite, caused. Still, I felt the couple were the real culprits. I pushed through the glass door, the cool morning air a balm on my flushed face. Freedom? Almost. I was almost out. "Hey, you!" The voice, the woman's voice, was surprisingly sharp, slicing through the din of the street. I cursed under my breath. "Damn it, Vance, you just had to look, didn't you?" My feet, despite every instinct screaming at them to keep moving, somehow turned. She was rising from their table, moving with a fluid grace that seemed out of place in the dingy diner. As she approached, I found myself struck by her beauty, something I'd completely missed in my agitation. It wasn't just physical attractiveness, it was an almost unsettling perfection, like staring into a blinding light. Her features were too refined, her eyes too piercing, radiating an unshakable confidence that felt less human and more like a predator's poise. "We saw that you were alone," she said, her voice soft, yet it seemed to fill the entire space, blocking out the traffic noise, the distant sirens. "You don't have to be, not today. You're free to come with us, if you'd like. We're just going around town, enjoying the day." I stood there, mouth agape, caught like a rabbit in a snare. My mind screamed, "Run!" My past experiences with kindness from strangers, Ethan, the smiling cannibal, immediately sprang to mind, his jovial facade chilling me even now, screamed danger, but my lips, traitorous things, formed a meek nod. It wasn't entirely a conscious choice. There was a subtle compulsion, a whisper against the edges of my sanity, making refusal feel utterly impossible, like a string being pulled. The man, who had been facing away, apparently sensed my acquiescence. He rose from his seat, turning with the same unnerving grace, and joined us. He paid for their meal, a crisp bill slapping onto the counter, and then the three of us stepped out into the harsh Valentine's Day sunshine. Great, Vance, I thought, a bitter taste in my mouth. Another fine mess you've gotten yourself into. This is exactly why you stay in your bunker. I was lucky in a twisted sort of way that I had no other plans. Otherwise, I would have abandoned them without a second thought, no matter who they were. My go bag was back at the motel, always packed, always ready, a testament to my transient, always on the run existence. Part of me wished I'd just grabbed it and driven until the gas tank was dry. My analog watch, usually a comfort, felt heavy on my wrist, a constant reminder of the passing time, each second ticking away my chances of escape. We spent a few hours drifting through the town, a surreal, unsettling tableau. We browsed quaint shops, bought a few trinkets, a cheap keychain I didn't want, a novelty pen I'd never use. Their forced conviviality, a thin veil over the unnerving undercurrent I sensed from them. They told me little about themselves, only that they were visitors from somewhere in old Europe. The phrase hung in the air, vague and unsettling, hinting at something ancient and profound that my tired brain couldn't quite grasp. Instead, they focused on me, their questions like probing fingers, dissecting my life, circling back repeatedly to the gaping void of my solitude on Valentine's Day. I felt a familiar flush of embarrassment, a prickle of shame that I tried to bury under layers of sarcasm. Never felt the need, I mumbled, my voice rougher than usual. It's just another day, another Hallmark holiday designed to make lonely people feel worse. It sounded weak, even to my own ears. They offered the expected, "That's fair." And the topic shifted, but not entirely. The woman would occasionally point out random women walking past, her eyes assessing, analytical, asking if I found them beautiful. The man would laugh, a low, rumbling sound. There was no mockery in it, no overt animosity like I'd felt back at the diner. Just an odd interest, like a scientist observing a specimen. The awkwardness was palpable, but not more than I'd expect from such a bizarre encounter. Still, my skin crawled. This wasn't normal. Nothing in my life ever was. It felt like the prelude to another one of those inexplicable horrors, the kind that had shadowed my every step since that night in Sycamore Grove, the night I'd escaped a fire, but had been marked by something far worse. Things took a definitive turn for the worse when we entered a bookstore. My stomach tightened. Bookstores, with their quiet corners and hushed reverence for the written word, were supposed to be safe. But then again, so were isolated mountain roads, quiet diners, and friendly neighbors, until they weren't. I remembered the man in the walls, the imposter Mitch, who'd lived in plain sight. Safety was an illusion, a lie I kept telling myself. The bookstore was predictably teeming with couples, their saccharine whispers and hand-holding a stark contrast to my growing apprehension. My companions, however, seemed perfectly at home, grabbing cups of coffee from the attached cafe, their movements fluid and unhurried as they wandered among the aisles. I'd had enough caffeine at the diner to fuel a small army, so I declined, opting instead to follow a few paces behind, trying desperately not to look like the pathetic third wheel I so clearly was. It took me a few moments, my observational skills dulled by the constant vigilance of the past few hours, but I eventually noticed a pattern. They were slowly, deliberately meandering through the history, mythology, and ancient cultures sections, their focus particularly drawn to European texts. Old Europe, the phrase echoed in my mind. I tried to decipher their interest, to pinpoint their exact heritage, but before I could piece anything together, the man turned to me, a smile already forming on his lips. "You know," he said, his voice a low purr that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "While this is all interesting and informative from a general perspective, there really isn't anything here that'll tell you the full truth of it. Of us. You know? I stared at him, my mind a blank slate. What do you mean? The question felt foolish even as I uttered it. His smile widened, a perfectly normal, friendly expression, and yet, there it was again, that subtle, darker meaning beneath the surface. The malevolence barely contained by a thin veneer of humanity. It was like looking at a beautifully painted canvas, knowing there was something hideous scrawled on the wall behind it. My heart, already a nervous drum against my ribs, quickened its pace. It felt like an anvil suddenly dropped into my chest. And as if he'd heard the frantic thumping, the man's eyes flickered down, straight to my chest. For the briefest, most horrifying second, the mask slipped. The friendly smile stretched into something monstrous, inhuman. His face seemed to shift, flesh rippling, eyes widening, and a once dormant malice flared to the surface, a primordial hunger that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't exactly demonic, not in the traditional sense, but there was a profound wrongness about it, an ancient, alien quality that made every cell in my body scream, flee. My legs, suddenly heavy and unresponsive, tried to move, but the solid wall of a bookshelf behind me stopped my pathetic attempt at retreat. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my limbs, freezing me in place. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the monstrous expression vanished. His face relaxed, the smile softening back into something no more threatening than a mischievous friend. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice genuinely concerned, devoid of any ironic inflection. The switch was so sudden, so seamless, it made my head spin. I wanted to scream, to run, to push past him and sprint into the street until my lungs burned. But some perverse part of me, that reluctant conscience, that fatal flaw, felt compelled to answer. "I'm fine. Yeah," I choked out, the words tasting like ash. My heart still hammered, a frantic drum solo in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribs. But his gaze, thankfully, had shifted back to mine. He nodded, then beckoned me to follow him. And I did, like a lamb to slaughter, like every poor bastard in every horror story I'd ever heard. We caught up to his partner, who had gravitated, predictably, to the horror section. She was engrossed in a book of old supernatural tales, her back to us, completely oblivious to my recent near-death experience. The man moved behind her, his hands settling possessively on her hips as he leaned over her shoulder, their heads bent in a mirror image of their earlier diner intimacy. Every few moments, low chuckles rumbled between them. Curiosity, that insidious, self-destructive trait that always gets me into trouble, tugged at me. I edged closer, straining to see the open pages. The story, as best as I could make out, was about blood drinkers, not the refined, aristocratic vampires of popular fiction, but something far more feral, ancient, and utterly monstrous. The kind of thing that probably stalked the dark corners of old Europe. The kind of thing that made my stomach churn with a primal fear I knew all too well. This wasn't some fantasy. This was a warning. After a while, they closed the book, their laughter echoing eerily in the quiet bookstore, and began to wander off again. I followed, a puppet on invisible strings, somehow knowing they expected me to. They headed towards a section of the bookstore cordoned off by yellow tape, an area undergoing renovation. The walls were bare, freshly painted, and the space around a corner was completely deserted, cut off from the main flow of foot traffic. An alarm blared in my head, a primal, lizard-brained warning, echoing the terror I'd felt hiding from the mirror doppelganger in that wretched motel. "Don't follow them. Vance, turn around. Go home. Call Buster. Pretend this never happened." But another impulse, stronger, colder, and utterly alien, suppressed that basic survival instinct. It felt like something had been implanted in my mind, a subtle suggestion, a silent command that bypassed all rational thought. I rounded the corner. I still can't figure out how they managed to transform so quickly. It must have taken 5, maybe 6 seconds, the time it took for me to walk those few paces, to turn that corner. But in that infinitesimal span, they had become something else entirely, something less than human, yet undeniably more. Older than mankind, certainly, but also more evolved, more refined in their savagery. They were horrific, almost identical in their new forms, though the woman retained her female characteristics, and the man his. Their bodies had broadened, swelling to nearly the width of the bookshelves that now lined the hallway behind them. Their eyes, once so piercing, had migrated further to their temples, giving them a disturbing, fish-like appearance above their now pointed noses. Their skulls had distended, ballooning to a nauseating size, lumpy and asymmetrical. The blonde hair they'd worn so casually was inexplicably gray, hanging in withered clumps from their grotesque scalps. They stood with bestially arched backs and hunched shoulders, like proto-men resurrected from some ancient, forgotten nightmare. But their narrow-eyed expressions, devoid of anything resembling warmth, bespoke a callous, alien intellect. Their clothes, in which had seemed so normal moments before, were now taut in some places, stretched to the point of tearing, and loose in others, hanging awkwardly from their mutated forms. Fresh blood stains marred the fabric, as if the transformation itself had caused their skin to burst, or tear in the process. The air around them grew heavy, stale, a cloying scent like old meat and damp earth. My stomach churned, a knot of pure revulsion tightening in my throat. They were abominable things, and yet I couldn't tear my gaze away. I was paralyzed, awestruck by their grotesque beauty, terror-stricken by the absolute certainty that had dawned upon me. From the moment they had laid eyes on me in that diner, I had been under their monstrous thrall. They hadn't invited me, they had summoned me, just like the pig creature had summoned me, just like the whispers in the walls had called me closer. I was a magnet for this horror, doomed to stumble from one nightmare to the next. No one should be alone on this day. Their voices, perfectly synchronized, echoed in the small, confined space, a resonant, ghoulish harmony that might have belonged to a reclusive crypt keeper, or perhaps the dead he kept. The woman's mouth, which, somehow, had become utterly lipless, a raw, puckered slit in her transformed face, opened. From it, a long, red-veined, pulsing flesh tube extended, like an insect's proboscis, thick and glistening. I watched, my eyes wide with horror, as it snaked through the air towards me, its tip twitching. My body was a cage, my limbs unresponsive. I could do nothing but whimper sheepishly, a pathetic, animal sound, as the appendage touched my neck, cold and clammy, yet pulsing with an inner life. Remembering the old tales in the book they'd laughed at, the ones about blood drinkers, a desperate, pathetic plea bubbled up. Don't drink my blood, I croaked, the words barely audible, assuming they were some horrifying precursor to the vampires of myth. They laughed, a raw, hoarse, ghoulish sound that scraped against my eardrums, echoing in the small, enclosed space. The woman impossibly laughed, despite the grotesque tube still extending from her mouth. The sound sent a stifling chill down my spine, silencing my whimper, paralyzing my very soul. It was the laughter of gods, or devils, playing with their food. The man, his ungodly face stretched into a terrible smile, spoke, his voice a low, rumbling bass. "Dear, could you imagine if we drank blood? If we needed to subsist on that vile stuff?" The woman, her tubular tongue still dancing around my neck, probing, exploring, replied, "Oh, I'd just give it all up. What a dreadful life. That'd be..." They let loose another round of that awful, rattling laughter, and my soul, already shrunken to a withered pea, seemed to shrink further, twisting in upon itself. I was nothing, a plaything. No, I'm not going to drink your blood, child. I'm going to give you some of mine. Just then, a searing, stabbing pain flared in my neck as the proboscis went rigid, its tip burrowing deeper. A violent, rhythmic pulsing began, a sensation utterly alien and invasive, and I felt something being steadily pumped into me. My vision blurred, the bookstore shelves swaying around me. I swooned as if suddenly, deeply intoxicated, my brain swimming in a dizzying haze. Something foreign, something utterly wrong, was coursing through my veins, paradoxically chilling and warming me at the same time. My skin prickled with 1,000 needles. My muscles twitched involuntarily. I felt feverish, drunk, physiologically unstable, my very cells rebelling against the alien intrusion. It was a violation far deeper than any physical wound, a violation of my very consciousness. It felt like the universe itself, the same malevolent force I'd glimpsed on that farm, was reaching inside me, twisting something vital. The proboscis withdrew, a wet, sucking sound. The woman slurped it back into her mouth with a disgusting, vein-streaked slurp, like a noodle. My legs, suddenly devoid of strength, gave way. I hit the floor with a dull thud, the impact jarring my teeth, just as their de-transformation began, their grotesque forms shimmering, shrinking, resolving back into the horrifyingly familiar faces of the couple from the diner. I was gently shaken awake by a bookstore employee, their face etched with concern. I saw their phone in their hand, the 911 screen glowing, though they hadn't yet pressed call. Still dazed, my head swimming with the lingering phantom sensations of alien fluid in my veins. I looked around for the nightmare couple, but saw only a small crowd of concerned customers, their faces a blur of worried expressions. My mind, desperate to believe it had all been some fever dream, some hallucination brought on by exhaustion and Valentine's Day cynicism, seized onto the normalcy. I assured everyone I was fine, that I'd just had a dizzy spell. The bookstore employee helped me stand, their touch gentle, almost deferential. I mumbled my thanks, my voice hoarse, and stumbled out of the store, finally listening to that deep-seated, lizard-brained warning that screamed at me to get out, to run, to flee. The cold street air hit me, a shock to my system. I walked, then ran, until my lungs burned, not stopping until I was back in the sterile, temporary comfort of my motel room, the heavy mag light from my go bag clutched in my hand. Buster, my scruffy companion, was curled up on the scratchy motel bedspread, his tail thumping a soft welcome. His presence was a small, steady anchor in a world that consistently tried to rip me apart. I desperately wished I'd stayed with him. I went straight to the bathroom, flipping on the harsh fluorescent light. I didn't bother wiping away the tears that streamed down my face. I had, after all, been stabbed, violently probed with something ancient and vile. There, in my neck, was a small, angry red puncture wound, rimmed with a weird, purplish ring from which trailed similarly colored streaks, like some bizarre bacterial infection or a spreading toxin. It looked unnatural, like a brand. It's been 3 hours since confirming the wound, and I've started hearing her voice. It's subtle at first, a faint whisper at the back of my mind, then growing stronger. She calls to me, across a distance that seems both vast and incredibly close, offering words of comfort and praise. Sometimes it sounds like a mother's soothing tones, other times like a lover's intimate murmurs. And a strange, unsettling feeling of affection has begun to blossom in my heart, a longing for a companionship whose nature feels disturbingly inhuman. I don't even know her name. They never told me, and I never bothered to ask, lost in my own cynical self-pity. And yet, I'm starting to think that I love her, that I need her, and that she feels the same way about me. It's like she's a part of me now, a parasitic thought, A new layer of trauma grafted directly onto my soul. This is worse than the screams from the bus. Worse than the imposter wearing Mitch's face. This is inside me. I have always felt alone and bitter on Valentine's Day. I don't feel that way anymore. That's the real horror. Character count, 9847.